Chapter 9. The General Order. Sir Terence sat alone in his spacious, severely furnished private room in the official quarters at Monsanto. On the broad carved writing table before him, there was a mass of documents relating to the clothing and accoutrement of the forces, to leaves of absence, to staff appointments. There were returns from the various divisions of the sick and wounded in hospital, from which a complete list was to be prepared for the Secretary of State for War Home. There were plans of the lines that Torres Vedras just received, indicating the progress of the works at various points. And there were documents and communications of all kinds concerned with the Adjutant General's multifarious and arduous duties, including an urgent letter from Colonel Fletcher suggesting that the Commander-in-Chief should take an early opportunity of inspecting in person the inner lines of fortification. Sir Terence sat alone in his spacious, severely furnished private room in the official quarters at Monsanto. Sir Terence, however, sat back in his chair, his work neglected, his eyes dreamily gazing through the open window, but seeing nothing of the sun-drenched landscape beyond, a heavy frown darkening his bronze and rugged face. His mind was very far from his official duties and the mass of reminder before him, this Augean stable of arrears. He was lost in thought of his wife and Tremaine. 5 days had elapsed since the ball at Count Redondo's, where Sir Terence had surprised the pair together in the garden, and his suspicions had been fired by the compromising attitude in which he had discovered them. Tremaine's frank, easy bearing, so unassociable with guilt, had, as we know, gone far to reassure him, and had even shamed him, so that it trampled his suspicions underfoot. But other things had happened since to revive his bitter doubts. Daily, constantly, had he been coming upon Tremaine and Lady O'Moy alone together in intimate, confidential talk which was ever silenced on his approach. The two had taken to wandering by themselves in the gardens at all hours, a thing that had never been so before, and O'Moy detected, or imagined that he detected, a closer intimacy between them, a greater warmth toward the captain on the part of her ladyship. Thus matters had reached a pass in which peace of mind was impossible to him. It was not merely what he saw, it was his knowledge of what was. It was his ever-present consciousness of his own age and his wife's youth. It was a memory of his antenuptial jealousy of Tremaine, which had been awakened by the gossip of those days, a gossip that pronounced Tremaine Una Butler's poor suitor, too poor either to declare himself or to be accepted if he did. The old wound which that gossip had dealt him then was reopened now. He thought of Tremaine's manifest concern for Una. He remembered how in that very room some 6 weeks ago, when Butler's escapade had first been heard of, it was from avowed concern for Una that Tremaine had urged him to befriend and rescue his rascally brother-in-law. He remembered, too, with increasing bitterness, that it was Una herself had induced him to appoint Tremaine to his staff. There were moments when the conviction of Tremaine's honesty, the thought of Tremaine's unswerving friendship for himself, would surge up to combat and abate the fires of his devastating jealousy. But evidence would kindle those fires anew until they flamed up to scorch his soul with shame and anger. He had been a fool in that he had married a woman of half his years. A fool in that he had suffered her former lover to be thrown into close association with her. Thus he assured himself. But he would abide by his folly, and so must she. And he would see to it that whatever fruits that folly yielded, dishonor should not be one of them. Through all his darkening rage there beat the light of reason. To avert, he bethought him, was better than to avenge, nor were such stains to be wiped out by vengeance. A cuckold remains a cuckold, though he take the life of the man who has reduced him to that ignominy. Tremaine must go before the evil transcended reparation. Let him return to his regiment and do his work of sapping and mining elsewhere than in O'Moy's household. Eased by that resolve, he rose, a tall, martial figure, youth and energy in every line of it for all his 46 years. A while he paced the room in thought. Then, suddenly, with hands clenched behind his back, he checked by the window, checked on a horrible question that had flashed upon his tortured mind. What if already the evil should be irreparable? What proof had he that it was not so? The door opened, and Tremaine himself came in quickly. "Here's the very devil to pay, sir," he announced, with that odd mixture of familiarity toward his friend and deference to his chief. O'Moy looked at him in silence with smoldering, questioning eyes, thinking of anything but the trouble which the captain's air and manner heralded. "Captain Stanhope has just arrived from headquarters with messages for you. A terrible thing has happened. sir. The dispatches from home by the Thunderbolt, which we forwarded from here 3 weeks ago, reached Lord Wellington only the day before yesterday." Sir Terence became instantly alert. Garfield, who carried them, came into collision at Penalva with an officer of Anson's brigade. There was a meeting, and Garfield was shot through the lung. He lay between life and death for a fortnight, with the result that the dispatches were delayed until he recovered sufficiently to remember them and to have them forwarded by other hands. But you had better see Stanhope himself. The aide-de-camp came in. He was splashed from head to foot in witness of the fury with which he had ridden. His hair was caked with dust and his face haggard, but he carried himself with soldierly uprightness, and his speech was brisk. He repeated what Tremaine had already stated, with some few additional details. This wretched fellow sent Lord Wellington a letter dictated from his bed, in which he swore that the duel was forced upon him, and that his honor allowed him no alternative. I don't think any feature of the case has so deeply angered Lord Wellington as this stupid plea. He mentioned that when Sir John Moore was at Hererius, in the course of his retreat upon Corunna, he sent forward instructions for the leading division to halt at Lugo, where he designed to deliver battle if the enemy would accept it. That dispatch was carried to Sir David Bear by one of Sir John's aides, but Sir David forwarded it by the hand of a trooper who got drunk and lost it. That, says Lord Wellington, is the only parallel, so far as he is aware of the present case, with this difference, that whilst a common trooper might so far fail to appreciate the importance of his mission, no such lack of appreciation can excuse Captain Garfield. "I am glad of that," said Sir Terence, who had been bristling. For a moment I imagined that it was to be implied I had been as indiscreet in my choice of a messenger as Sir David Baird. No, Sir Terence. I merely repeated Lord Wellington's words, that you may realize how deeply angered he is. If Garfield recovers from his wound, he will be tried by court-martial. He is under open arrest meanwhile, as is his opponent in the duel, a Major Sykes of the 23rd Dragoons. That they will both be broke is beyond doubt. But that is not all. This affair, which might have had such grave consequences, coming so soon upon the heels of Major Berkeley's business, has driven Lord Wellington to a step regarding which this letter will instruct you. Sir Terence broke the seal. The letter, penned by a secretary, but bearing Wellington's own signature, ran as follows: "The bearer, Captain Stanhope, will inform you of particulars of this disgraceful business of Captain Garfield's. The affair following so soon upon that of Major Berkeley has determined me to make it clearly understood to the officers in His Majesty's service that they have been sent to Peninsula to fight the French and not each other or members of the civilian population. While this campaign continues, and as long as I am in charge of it, I am determined not to suffer upon any plea whatever the abominable practice of dueling among those under my command. I desire you to publish this immediately in general orders, enjoining upon officers of all ranks, without exception the necessity to postpone the settlement of private quarrels at least until the close of this campaign. And to add force to this injunction, you will make it known that any infringement of this order will be considered as a capital offense, that any officer hereafter either sending or accepting a challenge will, if found guilty by a general court-martial, be immediately shot." Sir Terence nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "The measure is most wise, although I doubt if it will be popular. But, then, unpopularity is the fate of wise measures. I am glad the matter has not ended more seriously. The dispatches in question, so far as I can recollect, were not of great urgency." "There is something more," said Captain Stanhope. "The dispatches bore signs of having been tampered with." Tampered with? It was a question from Tremaine, charged with incredulity. But who would have tampered with them? "There were signs, that is all. Garfield was taken to the house of the parish priest, where he lay lost until he recovered sufficiently to realize his position for himself. No doubt you will have a schedule of the contents of the dispatch, Sir Terence?" "Certainly. It is in your possession, I think, Tremaine." Tremaine turned to his desk, and a brief search in one of his well-ordered drawers brought to light an oblong strip of paper folded and endorsed. He unfolded and spread it on Sir Terence's table, whilst Captain Stanhope, producing a note with which he came equipped, stooped to check off the items. Suddenly he stopped, frowned, and finally placed his finger under one of the lines of Tremaine's schedule, carefully studying his own note for a moment. "Ha!" he said quietly at last. What's this? And he read, Note from Lord Liverpool of reinforcements to be embarked for Lisbon in June or July. He looked at the adjutant and the adjutant's secretary. That would appear to be the most important document of all. Indeed, the only document of any vital importance. And it was not included in the dispatch as it reached Lord Wellington. The three looked gravely at one another in silence. Have you a copy of the note, sir? Inquired the aide-de-camp. Not a copy, but a summary of its contents. The figures it contained are penciled there on the margin. Tremaine answered. Allow me, sir, said Stanhope, and taking up a quill from the adjutant's table, he rapidly copied the figures. Lord Wellington must have this memorandum as soon as possible. The rest, Sir Terence, is of course a matter for yourself. You will know what to do. Meanwhile, I shall report to his lordship what has occurred. I had best set out at once. If you will rest for an hour and give my wife the pleasure of your company at luncheon, I shall have a letter ready for Lord Wellington, replied Sir Terence. Perhaps you'll see to it, Tremaine, he added, without waiting for Captain Stanhope's answer to an invitation which amounted to a command. Thus Stanhope was led away, and Sir Terence, all other matters forgotten for the moment, sat down to write his letter. Later in the day, after Captain Stanhope had taken his departure, the duty fell to Tremaine of framing the general order and seeing to the dispatch of a copy to each division. I wonder, he said to Sir Terence, who will be the first to break it? Why, the fool who's most anxious to be broke himself, answered Sir Terence. There appeared to be reservations about it in Tremaine's mind. It's a devilish stringent regulation, he criticized, but very salutary and very necessary. Oh, quite. Tremaine's agreement was unhesitating. But I shouldn't care to feel the restraint of it, and I thank heaven I have no enemy thirsting for my blood. Sir Terence's brow darkened. His face was turned away from his secretary. How can man be confident of that? He wondered. Oh, a clean conscience, I suppose, laughed Tremaine, and he gave his attention to his papers. Frankness, honesty, and light-heartedness rang so clear in the words that they sowed in Sir Terence's mind fresh doubts of the galling suspicion he had been harboring. Do you boast a clean conscience, Ned? He asked, not without a lurking shame at this deliberate sly searching of the other's mind. Yet he strained his ears for the answer. Almost clean, said Tremaine. Temptation doesn't stain when it's resisted, does it? Sir Terence trembled, but he controlled himself. Nay, now, that's a question for the casuists. They right answer you that it depends upon the temptation. And he asked point blank, what's tempting you? Tremaine was in a mood for confidences, and Sir Terence was his friend, but he hesitated. His answer to the question was an irrelevance. It's just hell to be poor, Omoe, he said. The adjutant turned to stare at him. Tremaine was sitting with his head resting on one hand, the fingers thrusting to the crisp fair hair, and there was gloom in his clear-cut face, a dullness in the usually keen gray eyes. Is there anything on your mind? Quoth Sir Terence. Temptation was the answer. It's an unpleasant thing to struggle against. But you spoke of poverty? To be sure. If I weren't poor, I could put my fortunes to the test and make an end of the matter one way or the other. There was a pause. Sure, I hope I'm the last man to force a confidence, Ned, said Omoe, but you certainly seem as if it would do you good to confide. Tremaine shook himself mentally. I think we had better deal with the matter of this dispatch that was tampered with at Penalva. So we will, to be sure. But it can wait a minute. Sir Terence pushed back his chair and rose. He crossed slowly to his secretary's side. What's on your mind, Ned? He asked with abrupt solicitude, and Ned could not suspect that it was the matter on Sir Terence's own mind that was urging him, but urging him hopefully. Captain Tremaine looked up with a rueful smile. I thought you boasted that you never forced a confidence. And then he looked away. Sylvia Armitage tells me that she is thinking of returning to England. For a moment the word seemed to Sir Terence of fresh irrelevance, another attempt to change the subject. Then quite suddenly a light broke upon his mind, shedding a relief so great and joyous that he sought to check it almost in fear. It is more than she has told me, he answered steadily. But then, no doubt, you enjoy her confidence. Tremaine flashed him a wry glance and looked away again. Alas, he said and fetched a sigh. And is Sylvia the temptation, Ned? Tremaine was silent for a while, little dreaming how Sir Terence hung upon his answer, how impatiently he awaited it. "Of course," he said at last. "Isn't it obvious to anyone?" And he grew rhapsodical. How could a man be daily in her company without succumbing to her loveliness, to her matchless grace of body and of mind, without perceiving that she is incomparable, peerless, as much above other women as an angel perhaps might be above herself? Before his glum solemnity, and before something else that Tremaine could not suspect, Sir Terence exploded into laughter. Of the immense and joyous relief in it, his secretary caught no hint. All he heard was a sheer amusement, and this galled and shamed him. For no man cares to be laughed at for such feelings as Tremaine had been led into betraying. "You think it's something to laugh at?" he said tartly. "Laugh, is it?" spluttered Sir Terence. "God grant I don't burst a blood vessel." Tremaine reddened. "When you've indulged your humor, sir," he said stiffly, "perhaps you'll consider the matter of this dispatch." But Sir Terence laughed more uproariously than ever. He came to stand beside Tremaine and slapped him heartily on the shoulder. "You'll kill me, Ned," he protested. "For God's sake, not so glum. It's that makes you ridiculous." "I am sorry you find me ridiculous." "Nay, then it's glad ye ought to be. By my soul, if Sylvia tempts you, man, why the devil don't you just succumb and have done with it? She's handsome enough and well set up with her air of an Amazon, and she rides uncommon straight, begad. Indeed, as a broth of a girl, she is in the hunting field, the ballroom, or at the breakfast table. Although riper acquaintance may discover her not to be quite all that you imagine her at present. Let your temptation lead you, then, entirely, and good luck to you, my boy." "Didn't I tell you, Omoe?" answered the captain, mollified a little by the sympathy and good feeling peeping through the adjutant's boisterousness, "that poverty is just hell. It's my poverty that's in the way. And is that all? Then it's thankful you should be that Sylvia Armitage has got enough for two. That's just it." "Just what?" "The obstacle. I could marry a poor woman. But Sylvia, have you spoken to her?" Tremaine was indignant. "How do you suppose I could? It'll not have occurred to you that the lady may have feelings which, having aroused, you ought to be considering?" A wry smile and a shake of the head was Tremaine's only answer, and then Carruthers came in fresh from Lisbon, where he had been upon business connected with the commissariat, and to Tremaine's relief the subject was perforce abandoned. Yet he marveled several times a day that the hilarity he should have awakened in Sir Terence continued to cling to the adjutant, and that despite the many vexatious matters claiming attention, he should preserve an irrepressible and almost boyish gaiety. Meanwhile, however, the coming of Carruthers had brought the adjutant a moment's seriousness, and he reverted to the business of Captain Garfield. When he had mentioned the missing note, Carruthers very properly became grave. He was a short, stiffly built man with a round, good-humored, rather florid face. "The matter must be probed at once, sir," he ventured. "We know that we move in a tangle of intrigues and espionage, but such a thing as this has never happened before. Have you anything to go upon?" "Captain Stanhope gave us nothing," said the adjutant. "It would be best perhaps to get Grant to look into it," said Tremaine. "If he is still in Lisbon," said Sir Terence. "I passed him in the street an hour ago," replied Carruthers. "Then by all means let a note be sent to him asking him if he will step up to Monsanto as soon as he conveniently can. You might see to it, Tremaine." Chapter 10. The Stifled Quarrel. It was noon of the next day before Colonel Grant came to the house at Monsanto, from whose balcony floated the British flag, and before whose portal stood a sentry in the tall bearskin of the Grenadiers. He found the adjutant alone in his room, and apologized for the delay in responding to his invitation, pleading the urgency of other matters that he had in hand. A wise enactment, this of Lord Wellington's, was his next comment. "I mean this prohibition of dueling. It may be resented by some of our young bloods as an unwarrantable interference with their privileges, but will do a deal of good, and no one can deny that there is ample cause for the measure. It is on the subject of the cause that I'm wanting to consult you," said Sir Terence, offering his visitor a chair. "Have you been informed of the details?" "No." "Let me give you them." And he related how the dispatch bore signs of having been tampered with, and how the only document of any real importance came to be missing from it. Colonel Grant, sitting with a saber across his knees, listened gravely and thoughtfully. In the end, he shrugged his shoulders, the keen hawk face unmoved. The harm is done and cannot very well be repaired. The information obtained, no doubt on behalf of Messina, will by now be on its way to him. Let us be thankful that the matter is not more grave, and thankful, too, that you were able to supply a copy of Lord Liverpool's figures. What do you want me to do? Take steps to discover the spy whose existence is disclosed by this event. Calhoun Grant smiled. That is precisely the matter which has brought me to Lisbon. How? Sir Terence was amazed. You knew? Oh, not that this had happened, but that the spy, or rather a network of espionage, existed. We move here in a web of intrigue wrought by ill will, self-interest, vindictiveness, and every form of malice. Whilst the great bulk of the Portuguese people and their leaders are loyally cooperating with us, there is a strong party opposing us which would prefer even to see the French prevail. Of course you are aware of this. The heart and brain of all this is, as I gather the Principal Sousa, Wellington has compelled his retirement from the government, but by doing so he has restricted the man's power for evil. He has certainly increased his will for evil and his activities. You tell me that Garfield was cared for by the parish priest at Penalva. There you are. Half the priests of the country are on Sousa's side, since the Patriarch of Lisbon himself is little more than a tool of Sousa's. What happens? This priest discovers that the British officer whom he has so charitably put to bed in his house is the bearer of dispatches. A loyal man would instantly have communicated with Marshal Beresford at Domar. This fellow, instead, advises the intriguers in Lisbon. The captain's dispatches are examined, and the only document of real value is abstracted. Of course, it would be difficult to establish a case against the priest, and it is always vexatious and troublesome to have dealings with that class, as it generally means trouble with the peasantry. But the case is as clear as crystal. But the intriguers here, can you not deal with them? I have them under observation, replied the colonel. I already knew the leaders, Sousa's lieutenants in Lisbon, and I can put my hand upon them at any moment. If I have not already done so, it is because I find it more profitable to lead them at large. It is possible, indeed, that I may never proceed to extremes against them. Conceive that they have enabled me to seize La Flèche, the most dangerous, insidious, and skillful of all Napoleon's agents. I found him at Redondo's ball last week in the uniform of a Portuguese major, and through him I was able to track down Sousa's chief instrument. I discovered them closeted with him in one of the card rooms. And you didn't arrest him? Arrest them? I apologized for my intrusion and withdrew. La Flèche took his leave of them. He was to have left Lisbon at dawn equipped with a passport countersigned by yourself, my dear adjutant. What's that? A passport for Major Vieira of the Portuguese Cacadores. Do you remember it? Major Vieira. Sir Terence frowned thoughtfully. Suddenly he recollected. But that was countersigned by me at the request of Count Samoval, who represented himself a personal friend of the Major's. So, indeed he is. But the Major in question was La Flèche nevertheless. And Samoval knew this? Sir Terence was incredulous. Colonel Grant did not immediately answer the question. He preferred to continue his narrative. That night, I had the false Major arrested very quietly. I have caused him to disappear for the present. His Lisbon friends believe him to be on his way to Messina with the information they no doubt supplied him. Messina awaits his return at Salamanca and will continue to wait. Thus, when he fails to be seen or heard, there will be a good deal of mystification on all sides, which is a proper state of mind in which to place your opponents. Lord Liverpool's figures, let me add, were not among the interesting notes found upon him, possibly because at that date they had not yet been obtained. And you say that Samoval was aware of the man's real identity? Insisted Sir Terence, still incredulous. Aware of it? Colonel Grant laughed shortly. Samoval is Sousa's principal agent, the most dangerous man in Lisbon and the most subtle. His sympathies are French through and through. Sir Terence stared at him in frank amazement, in utter unbelief. Oh, impossible, he ejaculated at last. I saw Samoval for the first time, said Colonel Grant by way of answer, in Oporto at the time of Soult's occupation. He did not call himself Samoval just then, any more than I call myself Calhoun Grant. He was very active there in the French interest. I should indeed be more precise, and say in Bonaparte's interest, for he was a man instrumental in disclosing to Soult the Bourbon conspiracy, which was undermining the Marshal's army. You do not know, perhaps, that French sympathy runs in Samoval's family. You may not be aware that the Portuguese Marquis of Alorna, who holds a command in the Emperor's army and is at present with Messina at Salamanca, is Samoval's cousin. But, faltered Sir Terence, Count Samoval has been a regular visitor here for the past 3 months. So I understand, said Grandcooley. If I had known of it before, I should have warned you. But, as you are aware, I have been in Spain on other business. You realize the danger of having such a man about the place. Scraps of information. Oh, as to that, Sir Terence interrupted, I can assure you that none have fallen from my official table. Never be too sure, Sir Terence. Matters here must ever be under discussion. There are your secretaries and the ladies, and Samoval has a great way with the women. What they know you may wager that he knows. They know nothing. That is a great deal to say. Little odds and ends now. A hint at one time, a word dropped at another. These things picked up naturally by feminine curiosity and retailed thoughtlessly under Samoval's charming suasion and display of Britannic sympathies. And Samoval has the devil's own talent for bringing together the pieces of a puzzle. Take the lines now. You may have parted with no details, but mention of them will surely have been made in this household. However, he broke off abruptly, that is all past and done with. I am as sure as you are that any real indiscretions in this household are unimaginable, and so we may be confident that no harm has yet been done. But you will gather from what I have now told you that Samoval's visits here are not a mere social waste of time, that he comes, acquires familiarity, and makes himself the friend of the family, with a very definite aim in view. He does not come again, said Sir Terence, rising. That is more than I should have ventured to suggest. But it is a very wise resolve. It will need tact to carry it out, for Samoval is a man to be handled carefully. I'll handle him carefully, devil a fear, said Sir Terence. You can depend upon my tact. Colonel Grant rose. In this matter, Penalva, I will consider further. But I do not think there is anything to be done now. The main thing is to stop up the outlets through which information reaches the French, and that is my chief concern. How is the stripping of the country proceeding now? It was more active immediately after Sousa left government, but the last reports announce a slackening again. They are at work in that, too, you see. Sousa will not slumber, while there's vengeance and self-interest to keep him awake. And he held out his hand to take his leave. You'll stay to luncheon? Said Sir Terence. It is about to be served. You are very kind, Sir Terence. They descended, to find luncheon served already in the open under the trellis vine, and the party consisted of Lady Omoe, Miss Armitage, Captain Tremaine, Major Carruthers, and Count Samoval, of whose presence this was the adjutant's first intimation. As a matter of fact, the Count had been at Monsanto for the past hour, the first half of which he had spent most agreeably on the terrace with the ladies. He had spoken so eulogistically of the genius of Lord Wellington and the valor of the British soldier, and particularly of the Irish soldier, that even Sylvia's instinctive distrust and dislike of him had been lulled a little for the moment. And they must prevail, he had exclaimed in a glow of enthusiasm, his dark eyes flashing. It is inconceivable that they should ever yield to the French, although the odds of numbers may lie so heavily against them. Are the odds of numbers so heavy? Said Lady Omoe in surprise, opening wide those almost childish eyes of hers. Alas! Anything from 3 to 5 to 1. Ah! But why should we despond on that account? And his voice vibrated with renewed confidence. The country is a difficult one, easy to defend, and Lord Wellington's genius will have made the best of it. There are, for example, the fortifications at Torres Vedras. Ah, yes, I have heard of them. Tell me about them, Count. Tell you about them, dear lady? Shall I carry perfumes to the rose? What can I tell you that you do not know so much better than myself? Indeed, I know nothing. Sir Terence is ridiculously secretive, she assured him, with a little frown of petulance. She realized that her husband did not treat her as an intelligent being to be consulted upon these matters. She was his wife, and he had no right to keep secrets from her. In fact, she said so. Indeed, no, Samoval agreed, and I find it hard to credit that it should be so. Then you forget, said Sylvia, that these secrets are not Sir Terence's own. They are the secrets of his office. Perhaps so, said the unabashed Samoval, But if I were Sir Terence, I should desire above all to allay my wife's natural anxiety. For I am sure you must be anxious, dear Lady Omoe. Naturally, she agreed, whose anxieties never transcended the fit of her gowns or the suitability of a coiffure. But Terence is like that. Incredible, the Count protested, and raised his dark eyes to heaven as if invoking its punishment upon so unnatural a husband. Do you tell me that you have never so much as seen the plans of these fortifications? The plans, Count. She almost laughed. Ah, he said. I dare swear then that you do not even know of their existence. He was jocular now. I am sure that she does not, said Sylvia, who instinctively felt that the conversation was following an undesirable course. Then you are wrong, she was assured. I saw them once a week ago in Sir Terence's room. Why? How would you know them if you saw them? Quoth Sylvia, seeking to cover what might be an indiscretion. Because they bore the name, Lines of Torres Vedras. I remember. And this unsympathetic Sir Terence did not explain them to you? Laughed Sam Oval. Indeed, he did not. In fact, I could swear that he locked them away from you at once. The Count continued on a jocular note. Not at once, but he certainly locked them away soon after, and whilst I was still there. In your place, then, said Sam Oval, ever on the same note of banter, I should have been tempted to steal the key. Not so easily done, she assured him. It never leaves his person. He wears it on a gold chain round his neck. What, always? Always, I assure you. Too bad, protested Sam Oval. Too bad, indeed. What, then, should you have done, Miss Armitage? It was difficult to imagine that he was drawing information from them. So bantering and frivolous was his manner. More difficult still to conceive that he had obtained any. Yet you will observe that he had been placed in possession of two facts: that the plans of the Lines of Torres Vedras were kept locked up in Sir Terence's own room, in the strong box, no doubt, and that Sir Terence always carried a key on a gold chain worn round his neck. Miss Armitage laughed. Whatever I might do, I should not be guilty of prying into matters that my husband kept hidden. Then you admit a husband's right to keep matters hidden from his wife. Why not? Madam, Sam Oval bowed to her, your future husband is to be envied on yet another count. And thus the conversation drifted, Sam Oval conceiving that he had obtained all the information of which Lady Omoe was possessed, and satisfied that he had obtained all that for the moment he required. How to proceed now was a more difficult matter, to be very seriously considered. How to obtain from Sir Terence the key in question, and reach the plan so essential to Marshal Messina. He was at table with them, as you know, when Sir Terence and Colonel Grant arrived. He and the Colonel were presented to each other, and bowed with a gravity quite cordial on the part of Sam Oval, who was by far the more subtle dissembler of the two. Each knew the other perfectly for what he was, yet each was in complete ignorance of the extent of the other's knowledge of himself, and certainly neither betrayed anything by his manner. At table the conversation was led naturally enough by Tremaine to Wellington's general order against dueling. This was inevitable when you consider that it was a topic of conversation that morning at every table to which British officers sat down. Tremaine spoke of the measure in terms of warm commendation, thereby provoking a sharp disagreement from Sam Oval. The deep and almost instinctive hostility between these two men, which had often been revealed in momentary flashes, was such that it must invariably lead them to take opposing sides in any matter admitting of contention. In my opinion, it is a most arbitrary and degrading enactment, said Sam Oval. I say so without hesitation, notwithstanding my profound admiration and respect for Lord Wellington and all his measures. Degrading? Echoed Grant, looking across at him. In what can it be degrading, Count? In that it reduces a gentleman to the level of the clod, was the prompt answer. A gentleman must have his quarrels, however sweet his disposition, and a means must be afforded him of settling them. Ye can always thrash an impudent fellow, opined the adjutant. Thrash? Echoed Sam Oval. His sensitive lip curled in disdain. To use your hands upon a man. He shuddered in sheer disgust. To one of my temperament, it would be impossible, and men of my temperament are plentiful, I think. But if you were thrashed yourself? Tremaine asked him, and the light in his gray eyes almost hinted at a dark desire to be himself the executioner. Sam Oval's dark, handsome eyes considered the captain steadily. To be thrashed myself? he questioned. My dear Captain, the idea of having hands laid upon me, soiling me, brutalizing me, is so nauseating, so repugnant, that I assure you I should not hesitate to shoot the man who did it just as I should shoot any other wild beast that attacked me. Indeed, the two instances are exactly parallel, and my country's courts will uphold in such a case the justice of my conduct. Then you may thank God, said Omoe, that you are not under British jurisdiction. I do, snapped Sam Oval, to make an instant recovery, at least so far as the matter is concerned. And he elaborated. I assure you, sirs, it will be an evil day for the nobility of any country when its government enacts against the satisfaction that one gentleman has the right to demand from another who offends him. Isn't the conversation rather too bloodthirsty for a luncheon table? Wondered Lady Omoe, and tactlessly she added, thinking with flattery to mollify Samoval and cool his obvious heat. You are yourself such a famous swordsman, Count. And then Tremaine's dislike of the man betrayed him into his deplorable phrase. At the present time, Portugal is in urgent need of her famous swordsman to go against the French and not to increase the disorders at home. A silence complete and ominous followed the rash words, and Samoval, white to the lips, pondered the imperturbable captain with a baleful eye. I think, he said at last, speaking slowly and softly and picking his words with care, I think that is innuendo. I should be relieved, Captain Tremaine, to hear you say that it is not. Tremaine was prompt to give him the assurance. No innuendo at all. A plain statement of fact. The innuendo, I suggested, lay in the application of the phrase. Do you make it personal to myself? Of course not, said Sir Terence, cutting in and speaking sharply. What an assumption. I am asking Captain Tremaine, the Count insisted, with grim firmness, notwithstanding his deferential smile to Sir Terence. I spoke quite generally, sir, Tremaine assured him, partly under the suasion of Sir Terence's interposition, partly out of consideration for the ladies, who were looking scared. Of course, if you choose to take it to yourself, sir, that is a matter for your own discretion. I think, he added, also with a smile, that the ladies find the topic tiresome. Perhaps we may have the pleasure of continuing it when they are no longer present. Oh, as you please, was the indifferent answer. Carruthers, may I trouble you to pass the salt? Lady O'Callaghan was complaining the other night of the abuse of salt in Portuguese cookery. It is an abuse I have never yet detected. I can't conceive Lady O'Callaghan complaining of too much salt in anything, begad, quoth Omoe with a laugh. If you had heard the story she told me about— Terence, my dear, his wife checked him, her fine brows raised, her stare frigid. Faith, we go from bad to worse, said Carruthers. Will you try to improve the tone of the conversation, Miss Armitage? It stands in urgent need of it. With a general laugh, breaking the ice of the restraint that was in danger of settling about the table, a semblance of ease was restored, and this was maintained until the end of the repast. At last the ladies rose, and, leaving the men at table, they sauntered off towards the terrace. But under the archway Sylvia checked her cousin. Una, she said gravely, you had better call Captain Tremaine and take him away for the present. Una's eyes opened wide. Why? She inquired. Miss Armitage was almost impatient with her. Didn't you see? Resentment is only slumbering between those men. It will break out again now that we have left them, unless you can get Captain Tremaine away. Una continued to look at her cousin, and then, her mind fastening ever upon the trivial to the exclusion of the important, her glance became arch. For whom is your concern? For Count Samoval or Ned? She inquired, and added with a laugh, You needn't answer me. It is Ned you are afraid for. I am certainly not afraid for him, was the reply on a faint note of indignation. She had reddened slightly. But I should not like to see Captain Tremaine or any other British officer embroiled in a duel. You forget Lord Wellington's order which they were discussing and the consequences of infringing it. Lady Omoe became scared. You don't imagine— Sylvia spoke quickly. I am certain that unless you take Captain Tremaine away, and at once, there will be serious trouble. And now behold Lady Omoe thrown into a state of alarm that bordered upon terror. She had more reason than Sylvia could dream, more reason she conceived than Sylvia herself, to wish to keep Captain Tremaine out of trouble just at present. Instantly, agitatedly, She turned and called to him. "Ned!" floated her silvery voice across the enclosed garden. And again, "Ned, I want you at once, please." Captain Tremaine rose. Grant was talking briskly at the time, his intention being to cover Tremaine's retreat, which he himself desired. Count Samoval's smoldering eyes were upon the captain and full of menace, but he could not be guilty of the rudeness of interrupting Grant or detaining Captain Tremaine when a lady called him. Chapter 11. The Challenge. Rebuke awaited Captain Tremaine at the hands of Lady Omoe, and it came as soon as they were alone together sauntering in the thicket of pine and cork oak on the slope of the hill below the terrace. "How thoughtless of you, Ned, to provoke Count Samoval at such a time as this." "Did I provoke him? I thought it was the Count himself who was provoking." Tremaine spoke lightly. "But suppose anything were to happen to you? You know the man's dreadful reputation." Tremaine looked at her kindly. This apparent concern for himself touched him. "My dear Una, I hope I can take care of myself, even against so formidable a fellow, and after all a man must take his chances, a soldier especially." "But what of Dick?" she cried. "Do you forget that he is depending entirely upon you, that if you should fail him he will be lost?" And there was something akin to indignation in the protesting eyes she turned upon him. For a moment Tremaine was so amazed that he was at a loss for an answer. Then he smiled. Indeed, his inclination was to laugh outright. The frank admission that her concern, which he had fondly imagined to be for himself, was all for Dick, betrayed a state of mind that was entirely typical of Una. Never had she been able to command more than one point of view of any question, and that point of view invariably of her own interest. All her life she had been accustomed to sacrifices great and small made by others on her own behalf, until she had come to look upon such sacrifices her absolute right. "I am glad you reminded me," he said with an irony that never touched her. "You may depend upon me to be discreetness itself, at least until after Dick has been safely shipped." "Thank you, Ned. You are very good to me." They sauntered a little way in silence. Then, "When does Captain Glennie sail?" she asked him. "Is it decided yet?" "Yes. I have just heard from him that the Telemachus will put to sea on Sunday morning at 2:00. At 2:00 in the morning. What an uncomfortable hour. Tides, as King Canute discovered, are beyond mortal control. The Telemachus goes out with the ebb. And after all, for our purposes surely no hour could be more suitable. If I come for Dick at midnight tomorrow, that will just give us time to get him snugly aboard before she sails. I have made all arrangements with Glennie. He believes Dick to be what he has represented himself. One of Bearsley's overseers named Jenkinson, who is a friend of mine and who must be got out of the country quietly. Dick should thank his luck for a good deal. My chief anxiety was lest his presence here should be discovered by anyone. Beyond Bridget, not a soul knows that he is here, not even Sylvia. You have been the soul of discreetness." "Haven't I?" she purred, delighted to have him discover virtue so unusual in her. Thereafter they discussed details. Or rather, Tremaine discussed them. He would come up to Monsanto at 12:00 tomorrow night in a caïque, in which he would drive Dick down to the river, at a point where a boat would be waiting to take him out to the Telemachus. She must see that Dick was ready in time. The rest she could safely leave to him. He would come in through the official wing of the building. The guard would admit him without question, accustomed to seeing him come and go at all hours. Nor would it be remarked that he was accompanied by a man in civilian dress when he departed. Dick was to be let down from her ladyship's balcony to the quadrangle by a rope ladder with which Tremaine would come equipped, having procured it for the purpose from the Telemachus. She hung upon his arm, overwhelming him now with her gratitude, her parasol sheltering them both from the rays of the sun as they emerged from the thicket intro of the meadowland in full view of the terrace where Count Samoval and Sir Terence were at that moment talking earnestly together. You will remember that Omoe had undertaken to provide that Count Samoval's visits to Monsanto should be discontinued. About this task he had gone with all the tact of which he had boasted himself master to Calhoun Grant. You shall judge of the tact for yourself. No sooner had the colonel left for Lisbon and Carruthers to return to his work than, finding himself alone with the Count, Sir Terence considered the moment a choice one in which to broach the matter. "I take it you're fond of walking, Count," had been his singular opening move. They had left the table by now, and were sauntering together on the terrace. "Walking," said Samoval. "I detest it." "And is that so? Well, Well, of course it's not so very far from your place at Bispo. Not more than half a league, I should say. Just so, said Omoe. Half a league there and half a league back. A league? It's nothing at all, of course. Yet for a gentleman who detests walking, it's a devilish long tramp for nothing. For nothing? Sam Oval checked and looked at his host in faint surprise. Then he smiled very affably. But you must not say that, Sir Terence. I assure you that the pleasure of seeing yourself and Lady Omoe cannot be spoken of as nothing. You are very good. Sir Terence was a very quintessence of courtliness, of concern for the other. But if there were not that pleasure, then, of course, it would be different. Sam Oval was beginning to be slightly intrigued. That's it, said Sir Terence. That's just what I'm meaning. Just what you're meaning. But, my dear General, you are assuming circumstances which fortunately do not exist. Not at present. Perhaps, but they might. Again Sam Oval stood still and looked at Omoe. He found something in the bronze, rugged face that was unusually sardonic. The blue eyes seemed to become hard, and yet there were wrinkles about their corners suggestive of humor that might be mockery. The Count stiffened, but beyond that he preserved his outward calm whilst confessing that he did not understand Sir Terence's meaning. It's this way, said Sir Terence. I've noticed that you're not looking so very well lately, Count. Really? You think that? The words were mechanical. The dark eyes continued to scrutinize that bronze face suspiciously. I do, and it's sorry I am to see it. But I know what it is. It's this walking backwards and forwards between here and Bispo that's doing the mischief. Better give it up, Count. Better not come toiling up here any more. It's not good for your health. Why, man, you're as white as a ghost this minute. He was indeed, having perceived at last the insult intended. To be denied the house at such a time was to checkmate his designs, to set a term upon his crafty and subtle espionage, precisely in the season when he hoped to reap at harvest. But his chagrin sprang not at all from that. His cold anger was purely personal. He was a gentleman of the fine flower, as he would describe himself, of the nobility of Portugal, and that a probably upstart Irish soldier himself, from Samville's point of view, a guest in that country, should deny him his house, and choose such terms of ill-considered jocularity in which to do it, was an affront beyond all endurance. For a moment passion blinded him, and it was only by an effort that he recovered and kept his self-control. But keep it he did. You may trust your practiced duelist for that, when he comes face to face with the necessity to demand satisfaction. And soon the mist of passion clearing from his keen wits, he sought swiftly for a means to fasten the quarrel upon Sir Terence in Sir Terence's own coin of galling mockery. Instantly he found it. Indeed, it was not very far to seek. Omoe's jealousy, which was almost a byword, as we know, had been apparent more than once to Sam Oval. Remembering it now, it discovered to him at once Sir Terence's most vulnerable spot, and cunningly Sam Oval proceeded to gall him there. A smile spread gradually over his white face, a smile of immeasurable malice. I am having a very interesting and instructive morning in this atmosphere of Irish boorishness, said he. First Captain Tremaine. Now don't be after blaming old Ireland for Tremaine's shortcomings. Tremaine's just a clumsy-mannered Englishman. I am glad to know there's a distinction. Indeed, I might have perceived it for myself. In motives, of course. That distinction is great indeed, and I hope that I am not slow to discover it, and in your case to excuse it. I quite understand, and even sympathize with your feelings, General. I am glad of that now, said Sir Terence, who had understood nothing of all this. Naturally, the Count pursued on a smooth, level note of amiability. When a man, himself no longer young, commits the folly of taking a young and charming wife, he is to be forgiven when a natural anxiety drives him to lengths which in another might be resented. He bowed before the empurpling Sir Terence. You're a damn coxcomb, it seems, was the answering roar. Of course you would assume it. It was to be expected. I condone it with the rest. And because I condone it, because I sympathize with what in a man of your age and temperament must amount to an affliction, I hasten to assure you upon my honor that so far as I am concerned there are no grounds for your anxiety. And who the devil asked for your assurances? It's stark mad ye are to suppose that I ever needed them. Of course you must say that, Sam Oval insisted, with a confident and superior smile. He shook his head, his expression one of amused sorrow. Sir Terence, you have knocked at the wrong door. You are youthful at least in your impulsiveness, but you are surely as blind as old Pantaloon in the comedy, or you would see where your industry would be better employed in shielding your wife's honor and your own. Goaded to fury, his blue eyes aflame now with passion, Sir Terence considered the sleek and subtle gentleman before him, and it was in that moment that the Count's subtlety soared to its finest heights. In a flash of inspiration, he perceived the advantages to be drawn by himself from conducting this quarrel to extremes. This is not mere idle speculation. Knowledge of the real motives actuating him rests upon the evidence of a letter which Samoval was to write that same evening to La Flèche, afterwards to be discovered, wherein he related what had passed, how deliberately he had steered the matter, and what he meant to do. His object was no longer the punishing of an affront. That would happen as a mere incident, a thing done, as it were, in passing. His real aim now was to obtain the keys of the adjutant's strong box, which never left Sir Terence's person, and so become possessed of the plans of the lines of Torres Vedras. When you consider in the light of this the manner in which Samoval proceeded, now you will admire with me at once the opportunism and the subtlety of the man. You will be after telling me exactly what you mean, Sir Terence had said. It was in that moment that Tremaine and Lady Omoe came arm in arm into the open on the hillside, half a mile away, very close and confidential. They came most opportunely to the Count's need, and he flung out a hand to indicate them to Sir Terence, a smile of pity on his lips. "You need but to look to take the answer for yourself," said he. Sir Terence looked and laughed. He knew the secret of Ned Tremaine's heart, and could laugh now with relish at that which hitherto had left him darkly suspicious. And who shall blame Lady Omoe? Count Samoval pursued. A lady so charming and so courted must seek her consolation for the almost unnatural union fate has imposed upon her. Captain Tremaine is of her own age, convenient to her hand, and for an Englishman not ill-looking. He smiled at Omoe with insolent compassion, and Omoe, losing all his self-control, slapped him resoundingly upon the cheek. "You're a dirty liar, Samoval, a muckrake," said he. Samoval stepped back, breathing hard, one cheek red, the other white. Yet by a miracle he still preserved his self-control. "I have proved my courage too often," he said, "to be under the necessity of killing you for this blow. Since my honor is safe, I will not take advantage of your overwrought condition." "Ye'll take advantage of it, whether ye like it or not," blazed Sir Terence at him. "I mean you to take advantage of it. You think I'll suffer any man to cast a slur upon Lady Omoe? I'll be sending my friends to wait on you today, Count. And by God, Tremaine himself shall be one of them." Thus did the hot-headed fellow deliver himself into the hands of his enemy. Nor was he warned when he saw the sudden gleam in Samoval's dark eyes. "Ha!" said the Count. It was a little exclamation of wicked satisfaction. "You are offering me a challenge, then? If I may make so bold, and as I've a mind to shoot you dead." "Shoot, did you say?" Samoval interrupted gently. "I said shoot, and it shall be at 10 paces, or across a handkerchief, or any damn distance you please." The Count shook his head. He sneered. "I think not shoot." And he waved the notion aside with a hand white and slender as a woman's. "That is too English or too Irish. The pistol, I mean, appropriately a fool's weapon." And he explained himself. Explained at last his extraordinary forbearance under a blow. "If you think I have practiced the small sword every day of my life for 10 years to suffer myself to be shot like a rabbit in the end. Ho, really." He laughed aloud. "You have challenged me, I think, Sir Terence, because I feared the predilection you had discovered. I was careful to wait until the challenge came from you. The choice of weapons lies, I think, with me. I shall instruct my friends to ask for swords." "Sorry a difference will it make to me," said Sir Terence. "Anything from a horsewhip to a howitzer." And then recollection descending like a cold hand upon him chilled his hot rage, struck the fine Irish arrogance all out of him, and left him suddenly limp. "My God!" he said, and it was almost a groan. He detained Samoval, who had already turned to depart. "A moment, Count," he cried. I had forgotten. There's a general order, Lord Wellington's enactment." "Awkward, of course," said Samoval, who had never for a moment been oblivious of that enactment, and who had been carefully building upon it. But you should have considered it before committing yourself so irrevocably. Sir Terence steadied himself. He recovered his truculence. Irrevocable or not, it will just have to be revocable. The meeting's impossible. I do not see the impossibility. I am not surprised you should shelter yourself behind an enactment, but you will remember this enactment does not apply to me, who am not a soldier. But it applies to me, who am not only a soldier, but the adjutant general here, the man chiefly responsible for seeing the order carried out. It would be a fine thing if I were the first to disregard it. I am afraid it is too late. You have disregarded it already, sir. How so? The letter of the law is against sending or receiving a challenge, I think. Omoe was distracted. Samoval, he said, drawing himself up, I will admit that I have been a fool. I will apologize to you for the blow and for the word that accompanied it. The apology would imply that my statement was a true one and that you recognized it. If you mean that, I mean nothing of the kind. Damn, I've a mind to horsewhip you and leave it at that. Do you think I want to face a firing party on your account? I don't think there's a remotest likelihood of any such contingency, replied Samoval. But Omoe went headlong on. And another thing, where will I be finding a friend to meet your friends? Who will dare to act for me in view of that enactment? The Count considered. He was grave now. Of course that is a difficulty, he admitted, as if he perceived it now for the first time. Under the circumstances, Sir Terence, and entirely to accommodate you, I might consent to dispense with seconds. Dispense with seconds? Sir Terence was horrified at the suggestion. You know that is irregular, that a charge of murder would lie against a survivor. Oh, quite so. But it is for your own convenience that I suggest it, though I appreciate your considerate concern on the score of what may happen to me afterwards should it come to be known that I was your opponent. Afterwards? After what? After I have killed you. And is it like that? Cried Omoe, his countenance inflaming again, his mind casting all prudence to the winds. It followed, of course, that without further thought for anything but the satisfaction of his rage, Sir Terence became as wax in the hands of Samoval's desires. Where do you suggest that we meet? He asked. There is my place at Bispo. We should be private in the gardens there. As for time, the sooner the better, though for secrecy's sake we had better meet at night. Shall we say at midnight? But Sir Terence would agree to none of this. Tonight is out of the question for me. I have an engagement that will keep me until late. Tomorrow night, if you will, I shall be at your service. And because he did not trust Samoval, he added, as Samoval himself had almost reckoned, but I should prefer not to come to Bispo. I might be seen going or returning. Since there are no such scruples on my side, I am ready to come to you here if you prefer it. It would suit me better. Then expect me promptly at midnight tomorrow, provided that you can arrange to admit me without my being seen. You will perceive my reasons. Those gates will be closed, said Omoe, indicating the now gaping massive doors that close the archway at night. But if you knock, I shall be waiting for you, and I will admit you by the wicket. Excellent, said Samoval suavely. Then, until tomorrow night, General. He bowed with almost extravagant submission and turning walked sharply away, energy and suppleness in every line of his slight figure, leaving Sir Terence to the unpleasant, almost desperate, thoughts that reflection must usher in as his anger faded. Chapter 12. The duel. It was a time of stress and even of temptation for Sir Terence. Honor and pride demanded that he should keep the appointment made with Samoval. Common sense urged him at all costs to avoid it. His frame of mind, you see, was not at all enviable. At moments he would consider his position as adjutant general, the enactment against dueling, the irregularity of the meeting arranged, and, consequently, the danger in which he stood on every score. At others he could think of nothing but the unpardonable affront that had been offered him and the venomously insulting manner in which it had been offered, and his rage welled up to blot out every consideration other than that of punishing Samoval. For 2 days and a night he was a sort of shuttlecock tossed between these alternating moods, and he was still the same when he paced the quadrangle with bowed head and hands clasped behind him awaiting Samoval a few minutes before 12 the following night. The windows that looked down from the 4 sides of that enclosed garden were all in darkness. The members of the household had withdrawn over an hour ago and were asleep by now. The official quarters were closed. The rising moon had just mounted above the eastern wing, and its white light fell upon the upper half of the facade of the residential site. The quadrangle itself remained plunged in gloom. Sir Terence, pacing there, was considering the only definite conclusion he had reached. If there were no way even now of avoiding this duel, at least it must remain secret. Therefore, it could not take place here in the enclosed garden of his own quarters, as he had so rashly consented. It should be fought upon neutral ground, where the presence of the body of the slain would not call for explanations by the survivor. From distant Lisbon on the still air came softly the chimes of midnight, and immediately there was a sharp rap upon the little door set in one of the massive gates that closed the archway. Sir Terence went to open the wicket, and Samoval stepped quickly over the sill. He was wrapped in a dark cloak. A broad brimmed hat obscured his face. Sir Terence closed the door again. The two men bowed to each other in silence, and as Samoval's cloak fell open, he produced a pair of dueling swords swayed together in a skin of leather. "You are very punctual, sir," said Omoe. "I hope I shall never be so discourteous as to keep an opponent waiting." "It is a thing of which I have never yet been guilty," replied Samoval, with deadly smoothness and that reminder of his victorious past. He stepped forward and looked about the quadrangle. "I am afraid the moon will occasion us some delay," he said. "It were perhaps better to wait some 5 or 10 minutes. By then the light in here should have improved." "We can avoid the delay by stepping out into the open," said Sir Terence. "Indeed, it is what I had to suggest in any case. There are inconveniences here which you may have overlooked." But Samoval, who had purposes to serve of which this duel was but a preliminary, was of a very different mind. "We are quite private here, your household being abed," he answered. "Whilst outside, one can never be sure even at this hour of avoiding witnesses and interruption. Then again, the turf is smooth as a table on that patch of lawn, and the ground well known to both of us. That, I can assure you, is a very necessary condition in the dark, and one not be found haphazard in the open. But there is yet another consideration, sir. I prefer that we engage on neutral ground, so that the survivors shall not be called upon for explanations that might be demanded if we fought here." Even in the gloom, Sir Terence caught the flash of Samuel's white teeth as he smiled. "You trouble yourself unnecessarily on my account," was the smoothly ironic answer. "No one has seen me come, and no one is likely to see me depart." "You may be sure that no one shall, by God," snapped Omoe, stung by the sly insolence of the other's assurance. "Shall we get to work, then?" Samoval invited. "If you're set on dying here, I suppose I must be after humoring you and make the best of it. As soon as you please, then." Omoe was very fierce. They stepped to the patch of lawn in the middle of the quadrangle, and there Samoval threw off altogether his cloak and hat. He was closely dressed in black, which in that light rendered him almost invisible. Sir Terence, less practiced and less calculating in these matters, wore an undress uniform, the red coat of which showed grayish. Samoval observed this rather with contempt than with satisfaction in the advantage it afforded him. Then he removed the swathing from the swords and, crossing them, presented the hilts to Sir Terence. The adjutant took one and the count retained the other, which he tested, thrashing the air with it so that it hummed like a whip. That done, however, he did not immediately fall on. "In a few minutes the moon will be more obliging," he suggested, "if you would prefer to wait." But it occurred to Sir Terence that in the gloom the advantage might lie slightly with himself, since the other's superior swordplay would perhaps be partly neutralized. He cast a last look round at the dark windows. "I find it light enough," he answered. Samoval's reply was instantaneous. "On guard, then," he cried, and on the words, without giving Sir Terence so much as time to comply with the invitation, he whirled his point straight and deadly at the grayish outline of his opponent's body. But a ray of moonlight caught the blade, and its livid flash gave Sir Terence warning of the thrust so treacherously delivered. He saved himself by leaping backwards, just saved himself with not an inch to spare, and threw up his blade to meet the thrust. "Ye murderous villain!" he snarled under his breath, as steel ground on steel, and he flung forward to the attack. But from the gloom came a little laugh to answer him, and his angry lunge was foiled by an enveloping movement that ended in a riposte, with that they settled down to it. Sir Terence in a rage upon which that assassin stroke had been fresh fuel, the Count cool and unhurried, delaying until the moonlight should have crept a little farther, so as to enable him to make quite sure that his stroke, when delivered, should be final. Meanwhile, he pressed Sir Terence towards the side where the moonlight would strike first, until they were fighting close under the windows of the residential wing. Sir Terence with his back to them, Sam Oval facing them. It was fate that placed him so, the fate that watched over Sir Terence even now when he felt his strength failing him, his sword arm turning to lead under the strain of an unwanted exercise. He knew himself beaten, realized the dexterous ease, the masterly economy of vigor, and the deadly sureness of his opponent's play. He knew that he was at the mercy of Sam Oval. He was even beginning to wonder why the Count should delay to make an end of a situation of which he was so completely master. And then, quite suddenly, even as he was returning thanks that he had taken precaution of putting all his affairs in order, something happened. A light showed. It flared up suddenly, to be as suddenly extinguished, and it had its source in the window of Lady Ometh's dressing room, which Sam Oval was facing. That flash, drawing off the Count's eyes for one instant, and leaving them blinded for another, had revealed him clearly at the same time to Sir Terence. Sir Terence's blade darted in, driven by all that was left of his spent strength, and Sam Oval, his eyes unseeing, in that moment had fumbled widely and failed to find the other steel until he felt it sinking through his body, searing him from breast to back. His arms sank to his sides quite nervously. He uttered a faint exclamation of astonishment, almost instantly interrupted by a cough. He swayed there a moment, the cough increasing until it choked him. Then, suddenly limp, he pitched forward upon his face and lay clawing and twitching at Sir Terence's feet. Sir Terence himself scarcely realized what had taken place, for the whole thing had happened within the time of a couple of heartbeats, stood quite still, amazed and awed, in a half-crouching attitude, looking down at the body of the fallen man. And then from above, ringing upon the deathly stillness, he caught a sibilant whisper. What was that? S.H. He stepped back softly and flattened himself instinctively against the wall. Then, profoundly intrigued and vaguely alarmed on several scores, he peered up at the windows of his wife's room, whence the sound had come, whence the sudden light had come which, as he now realized, had given him the victory in that unequal contest. Looking up at the balcony in whose shadow he stood concealed, he saw two figures there, his wife's and another's, and at the same time he caught sight of something black that dangled from the narrow balcony, and peered more closely to discover a rope ladder. He felt his skin roughening, bristling like a dog's. He was conscious of being cold from head to foot, as if the flow of his blood had been suddenly arrested, and a sense of sickness overcame him. And then, to turn that horrible doubt of his into still more horrible certainty, came a man's voice, subdued, yet not so subdued but that he recognized it for Ned Tremaine's. There is someone lying there. I can make out the figure. Don't go down. For pity's sake, come back. Come back and wait, Ned. If anyone should come and find you, we shall be ruined. Thus hoarsely whispering, vibrating with terror, the voice of his wife reached Omoe, to confirm him the unsuspecting blind cuckold that Sam Oval had dubbed him to his face, for which Sam Oval, warning the guilty pair with his last breath even as he had earlier so mockingly warned Sir Terence, had coughed up his soul on the turf of that enclosed garden. Crouching there for a moment longer, a man bereft of movement and of reason, stood Omoe, conscious only of pain, in an agony of mind and heart that at one and the same time froze his blood and drew the sweat from his brow. Then he was for stepping out into the open, and, giving flow to rage and surging violence that followed, calling down the man who had dishonored him and slaying him there under the eyes of that troll who had brought him to this shame. But he controlled the impulse, or else Satan controlled it for him. That way, whispered the tempter, was too straight and simple. He must think. He must have time to readjust his mind to the horrible circumstances so suddenly revealed. Very soft and silently, keeping well within the shadow of the wall, he sidled to the door which he had left ajar. Soundlessly he pushed it open, passed in, and as soundlessly closed it again. For a moment he stood leaning heavily against his timbers, his breath coming in short, panting sobs. Then he steadied himself and, turning, made his way down the corridor to the little study which had been fitted up for him in the residential wing, and where sometimes he worked at night. He had been writing there that evening ever since dinner, and he had quitted the room only to go to his assignation with Sam Oval, leaving the lamp burning on his open desk. He opened the door, but before passing in he paused a moment, straining his ears to listen for sounds overhead. His eyes, glancing up and down, were arrested by a thin blade of light under a door at the end of the corridor. It was the door of the butler's pantry, and the line of light announced that Mullins had not yet gone to bed. At once Sir Terence understood that, knowing him to be at work, the old servant had himself remain below in case his master should want anything before retiring. Continuing to move without noise, Sir Terence entered his study, closed the door, and crossed to his desk. Wearily, he dropped into the chair that stood before it, his face drawn and ghastly, his smoldering eyes staring vacantly ahead. On the desk before him lay the letters that he had spent the past hours in writing, one to his wife, another to Tremaine, another to his brother in Ireland, and several others connected with his official duties, making provision for their uninterrupted continuance in the event of his not surviving the encounter. Now it happened that amongst the latter, there was one that was destined hereafter to play a considerable part. It was a note for the Commissary General upon a matter that demanded immediate attention, and the only one of all those letters that need now survive. It was marked most urgent, and had been left by him for delivery first thing in the morning. He pulled open a drawer and swept into it all the letters he had written save that one. He locked that drawer, then unlocked another, and took thence a case of pistols. With shaking hands, he lifted out one of the weapons to examine it, and all the while, of course, his thoughts were upon his wife and Tremaine. He was considering how well-founded had been his every twinge of jealousy, how wasted, how senseless the reactions of shame that had followed them, how insensate his trust in Tremaine's honesty, and above all, with what crafty, treacherous subtlety Tremaine had drawn a red herring across the trail of his suspicions by pretending to an unutterable passion for Sylvia Armitage. It was perhaps that piece of duplicity, worthy, he thought, of the Iscariot himself, that galled Sir Terence now most sorely, that, in the memory of his own silly credulity, he had been such a ready dupe. How those two together must have laughed at him. Oh! Tremaine had been very subtle. He had been the friend, the quasi-brother, parading his affection for the Butler family to excuse the familiarities with Lady O'Moy which he permitted himself under Sir Terence's very eyes. O'Moy thought of them as he had seen them in the garden on the night of Redondo's ball, remembered the air of transparent honesty by which that damned hypocrite, when discovered, had deflected his just resentment. Oh! There was no doubt that the treacherous blackguard had been subtle, but by God, subtlety should be repaid with subtlety. He would deal with Tremaine as cruelly as Tremaine had dealt with him, and his wanton wife, too, should be repaid in kind. He beheld the way clear, in a flash of wicked inspiration. He put back the pistol, slapped down the lid of the box, and replaced it in its drawer. He rose, took up the letter to the Commissary General, stepped briskly to the door, and pulled it open. "Mullins," he called sharply. "Are you there?" Mullins. Came the sound of a scraping chair, and instantly that door at the end of the corridor was thrown open, and Mullins stood silhouetted against the light behind him. A moment he stood there, then came forward. "You called, Sir Terence?" "Yes." Sir Terence's voice was miraculously calm. His back was to the light and his face in shadow, so that its drawn, haggard look was not perceptible to the butler. "I am going to bed. But first I want you to step across to the sergeant of the guard with this letter for the Commissary General. Tell him that it is of the utmost importance, and ask him to arrange to have it taken into Lisbon first thing in the morning." Mullins bowed, venerable as an archdeacon in aspect and bearing, as he received the letter from his master. "Certainly, Sir Terence." As he departed, Sir Terence turned and slowly paced back to his desk, leaving the door open. His eyes had narrowed. There was a cruel, an almost evil smile on his lips. Of the generous, good-humored nature imprinted upon his face, every sign had vanished. His countenance was a mask of ferocity, restrained by intelligence, cold and calculating. Oh! He would pay the score that lay between himself and those two who had betrayed him. They should receive treachery for treachery, mockery for mockery, and for dishonor or death. They had deemed him an old fool. What was the expression that Samoval had used? Pantaloon in the comedy. Well, he had been Pantaloon in the comedy so far. But now they should find him Pantaloon in the tragedy. Nay, not Pantaloon at all, but Polichinelle, the sinister jester, the cynical clown who laughs in murdering. And in anguished silence should they bear the punishment he would mete out to them, or else in no less anguished speech themselves proclaimed their own dostarity to the world. His wife he beheld now in a new light. It was out of vanity and greed that she had married him, because of the position in the world that he could give her. Having done so, at least she might have kept faith. She might have been honest and abided by the bargain. If she had not done so, it was because honesty was beyond her shallow nature. He should have seen before what he now saw so clearly. He should have known her for a lovely, empty husk, a silly, fluttering butterfly, a toy, a thing of vanity's emotions and nothing else. Thus Sir Terence, cursing the day when he had mated with a fool. Thus Sir Terence, whilst he stood there waiting for the outcry from Mullins that should proclaim the discovery of the body and afford him a pretext for having the house searched for the slayer. Nor had he long to wait. Sir Terence, Sir Terence, for God's sake, Sir Terence, he heard the voice of his old servant. Came the loud crash of the door thrust back until it struck the wall, and quick steps along the passage. Sir Terence stepped out to meet him. Why, what the devil? He was beginning his bluff, normal tones when the servant, showing a white, scared face, cut him short. A terrible thing, Sir Terence. Oh, the saints protect us. A dreadful thing. This way, sir. There's a man killed. Count Samoval, I think it is. What? Where? Out yonder, in the quadrangle, sir. But, Sir Terence checked. Count Samoval, did you say? Impossible. And he went out quickly, followed by the butler. In the quadrangle he checked. In the few minutes that were sped since he had left the place, the moon had overtopped the roof of the opposite wing, so that full upon the enclosed garden fell now its white light, illumining and revealing. There lay the black still form of Samoval supine, his white face staring up into the heavens, and beside him knelt Tremaine, whilst in the balcony above leaned her ladyship. The rope ladder, Sir Terence's swift glance observed, had disappeared. He halted in his advance, standing at gaze a moment. He had hardly expected so much. He had conceived the plan of causing the house to be searched immediately upon Mullins's discovery of the body. But Tremaine's rashness in adventuring down in this fashion spared him even that necessity. True, it set up other difficulties, but he was not sure that the matter would not be infinitely more interesting thus. He stepped forward and came to a standstill beside the two, his dead enemy and his living one. Chapter 13. Polichinelle. Why, Ned? He asked gravely. What's happened? It is Samoval, was Tremaine's quiet answer. He is quite dead. He stood up as he spoke, and Sir Terence observed with terrible inward mirth that his tone had a frank and honest ring, his bearing the imperturbable ease which more than once before had imposed upon him as the outward signs of an easy conscience. This secretary of his was a cool scoundrel. Samoval, is it? Said Sir Terence, and went down on one knee beside the body to make a perfunctory examination. Then he looked up at the captain. And how did this happen? Happen? Echoed Tremaine, realizing that the question was being addressed particularly to himself. That is what I am wondering. I found him here in this condition. You found him here? Oh, you found him here in this condition. Curious. Over his shoulder he spoke to the butler. Mullins, you had better call the guard. He picked up the slender weapon that lay beside Samoval, a dueling sword. Then he looked searchingly about him until his eyes caught the gleam of the other blade near the wall, where himself he had dropped it. Ah, he said, and went to pick it up. Very odd. He looked up at the balcony, over the parapet at which his wife was leaning. Did you see anything, my dear? He asked, and neither Tremaine nor she detected a faint note of wicked mockery in the question. There was a moment's pause before she answered him, faltering. And no, I saw nothing. Sir Terence's straining ears caught no faintest sound of the voice that had prompted her urgently from behind the curtained windows. How long have you been there? He asked her. A moment only, she replied, again after a pause. I thought I heard a cry, and I came to see what had happened. Her voice shook with terror, but what she beheld would have been quite enough to account for that. The guard filed into the doors from the official quarters, a sergeant with a halberd in one hand and a lantern in the other, followed by 4 men, and lastly by Mullins. They halted and came to attention before Sir Terence. And almost at the same moment there was a sharp, rattling knock on the wicket in the great closed gates through which Samoval had entered. Startled, but without showing any signs of it, Sir Terence bade Mullins go open, and in a general silence all waited to see who it was that came. A tall man, bowing his shoulders to pass under the low lintel of that narrow door, stepped over the sill and into the courtyard. He wore a cocked hat, and as his great cavalry cloak fell open, the yellow rays of the sergeant's lantern gleamed faintly on a British uniform. Presently, as he advanced into the quadrangle, he disclosed the aquiline features of Calhoun Grant. "Good evening, General." "Good evening, Tremaine." He greeted one and the other. Then his eyes fell upon the body lying between them. "Sam Oval, eh? So I am not mistaken in seeking him here. I have had him under very close observation during the past day or two, and when one of my men brought me word tonight that he had left his place at Bispo on foot and alone, going along the upper Alcantara road, I've had a notion that he might be coming to Monsanto, and I followed, but I hardly expected to find this. How has it happened?" "That is what I was just asking, Tremaine," replied Sir Terence. "Mullins discovered him here quite by chance with the body." "Oh," said Grant, and turned to the captain. "Was it you then?" "Aye," interrupted Tremaine with sudden violence. He seemed now to become aware for the first time of the gravity of his position. "Certainly not, Colonel Grant. I heard a cry, and I came out to see what it was. I found Sam Oval here, already dead." "I see," said Grant. "You were with Sir Terence, then, when this—" "Nay," Sir Terence interrupted. "I have been alone since dinner, clearing up some arrears of work. I was in my study there when Mullins called me to tell me what he had discovered. It looks as if there had been a duel. Look at these swords." Then he turned to his secretary. "I think, Captain Tremaine," he said gravely, "that you had better report yourself under arrest to your colonel." Tremaine stiffened suddenly. "Report myself under arrest?" he cried. "My God! Sir Terence, you don't believe that I—" Sir Terence interrupted him. The voice in which he spoke was stern, almost sad, but his eyes gleamed with fiendish mockery the while. It was Polichinelle that spoke, Polichinelle that mocks what time he slays. "What were you doing here?" he asked, and it was like moving the checkmating piece. Tremaine stood stricken and silent. He cast a desperate upward glance at the balcony overhead. The answer was so easy, but it would entail delivering Richard Butler to his death. Colonel Grant, following his upward glance, beheld Lady Omoe for the first time. He bowed, swept off his cocked hat, and perhaps her ladyship, he suggested to Sir Terence, may have seen something. "I have already asked her," replied Omoe, and then she herself was feverishly assuring Colonel Grant that she had seen nothing at all, that she had heard a cry and had come out onto the balcony to see what was happening. "And was Captain Tremaine here when you came out?" asked Omoe, the deadly jester. "Yes," she faltered. "I was only a moment or two before yourself." "You see," said Sir Terence heavily to Grant, and Grant, with pursed lips, nodded, his eyes moving from Omoe to Tremaine. "But, Sir Terence," cried Tremaine, "I give you my word, I swear to you, that I know absolutely nothing of how Sam Oval met his death. What were you doing here?" Omoe asked again, and this time the sinister, menacing note of derision vibrated clearly in question. Tremaine, for the first time in his honest, upright life, found himself deliberately choosing between truth and falsehood. The truth would clear him, since with that truth he would produce witnesses to it, establishing his movements completely. But the truth would send a man to his death. And so, for the sake of that man's life, he was driven into falsehood. "I was on my way to see you," he said. "At midnight?" cried Sir Terence on a note of grim doubt. "To what purpose?" "Really, Sir Terence, if my word is not sufficient, I refuse to submit to cross-examination." Sir Terence turned to the sergeant of the guard. "How long is it since Captain Tremaine arrived?" he asked. The sergeant stood to attention. "Captain Tremaine, sir, arrived rather more than half an hour ago. He came in a kickle, which is still waiting at the gates." "Half an hour ago, eh?" said Sir Terence, and from Calhoun Grant there was a sharp and audible intake of breath, expressive either of understanding or surprise, or both. The adjutant looked at Tremaine again. "As my questions seem only to entangle you further," he said, "I think you had better do as I suggest without more protests. Report yourself under arrest to Colonel Fletcher in the morning, sir." Still Tremaine hesitated for a moment, then drawing himself up, he saluted curtly Very well, sir, he replied. But Terence, cried her ladyship from above. Ah, said Sir Terence, and he looked up. You would say? He encouraged her, for she had broken off abruptly. Checked again, although none below could guess it, by the one behind who prompted her. Couldn't you wait? She was faltering, compelled to it by his question. Certainly. But for what? Quoth he, grimly sardonic. Wait until you have some explanation, she concluded lamely. That will be the business of the court-martial, he answered. My duty is quite clear and simple, I think. You needn't wait, Captain Tremaine. And so, without another word, Tremaine turned and departed. The soldiers, in compliance with a short command issued by Sir Terence, took up the body and bore it away to a room in the official quarters. And in their wake went Colonel Grant, after taking his leave of Sir Terence. Her ladyship vanished from the balcony and closed her windows. And finally Sir Terence, followed by Mullins slowly, with bowed head and dragging steps, re-entered the house. In the quadrangle, flooded now by the cold, white light of the moon, all was peace once more. Sir Terence turned into his study, sank into the chair by his desk, and sat there a while staring into vacancy, a diabolical smile upon his handsome, mobile mouth. Gradually the smile faded and horror overspread his face. Finally he flung himself forward and buried his head in his arms. There were steps in the hall outside, a quick mutter of voices, and then the door of his study was flung open, and Miss Armitage came sharply to rouse him. Terence, what has happened to Captain Tremaine? He sat up stiffly as she sped across the room to him. She was wrapped in a blue quilted bedgown. Her dark hair hung in two heavy plaits, and her bare feet had been hastily thrust into slippers. Sir Terence looked at her with eyes that were dull and heavy, and that yet seemed to search her white, startled face. She set a hand on his shoulder and looked down into his ravaged, haggard countenance. He seemed suddenly to have been stricken into an old man. Mullins has just told me that Captain Tremaine has been ordered under arrest for killing Count Samoval. Is it true? Is it true? She demanded wildly. It is true, he answered her, and there was a heavy, sneering curl on his upper lip. But she stopped and put a hand to her throat. She looked as if she would stifle. She sank to her knees beside him and caught his hand in both her own that were trembling. Oh, you can't believe it. Captain Tremaine is not the man to do a murder. The evidence points to a duel, he answered dully. A duel? She looked at him, and then, remembering what had passed that morning between Tremaine and Samoval, remembering, too, Lord Wellington's edict. Oh, God, she gasped. Why did you let them take him? They didn't take him. I ordered him under arrest. He will report himself to Colonel Fletcher in the morning. You ordered him? You, his friend. Anger, scorn, reproach, and sorrow all blending in her voice bore him a clear message. He looked down at her most closely, and gradually compassion crept into his face. He set his hands on her shoulders. She suffered it passively, insensibly. You care for him, Sylvia? He said, between inquiry and wonder. Well, we are both fools together, child. The man is a dastard, a blackguard, a Judas, to be repaid with betrayal for betrayal. Forget him, girl. Believe me, he isn't worth a thought. Terence. She looked in her turn into that distorted face. Are you mad? She asked him. Very nearly, he answered, with a laugh that was horrible to hear. She drew back and away from him, bewildered and horrified. Slowly she rose to her feet. She controlled with difficulty the deep emotion swaying her. Tell me, she said slowly, speaking with obvious effort, what will they do to Captain Tremaine? What will they do to him? He looked at her. He was smiling. They will shoot him, of course. And you wish it, she denounced him in a whisper of horror. Above all things, he answered. A more poetic justice never overtook a blackguard. Why do you call him that? What do you mean? I will tell you, afterwards, after they have shot him, unless the truth comes out before. What truth do you mean? The truth of how Samoval came by his death. Oh, no, that matter is quite clear, the evidence complete. I will tell you afterwards what I mean. It may help you to bear your trouble, thankfully. She approached him again. Won't you tell me now? She begged him. No, he answered, rising and speaking with finality. Afterwards, if necessary, afterwards. And now get back to bed, child, and forget the fellow. I swear to you that he isn't worth a thought. Later I shall hope to prove it to you. That you never will, she told him fiercely. He laughed, and again his laugh was harsh and terrible in its bitter mockery. Yet another trusting fool, he cried. The world is full of them. It is made up of them, with just a sprinkling of knaves to batten on their folly. Go to bed, Sylvia, and pray for understanding of men. It is a possession beyond riches. I think you are more in need of it than I am, she told him, standing by the door. Of course you do. You trust, which is why you are a fool. Trust, he said, speaking the very language of Polichinelle, is the livery of fools. She went without answering him and toiled upstairs with dragging feet. She paused a moment in the corridor above, outside Una's door. She was in such need of communion with someone that for a moment she thought of going in, but she knew beforehand the greeting that would await her. The empty platitudes, the obvious small change of verbiage which her ladyship would dole out. The very thought of it restrained her, and so she passed on to her own room, and a sleepless night in which to piece together the puzzle which the situation offered her, the amazing enigma of Sir Terence's seeming access of insanity. And the only conclusion that she reached was that intertwined with the death of Samoval there was some other circumstance which had aroused in the adjutant an unreasoning hatred of his friend, converting him into Tremaine's bitterest enemy, intent, as he had confessed, upon seeing him shot for that night's work. And because she knew them both for men of honor above all, the enigma was immeasurably deepened. Had she but obeyed the transient impulse to seek Lady Omoe, she might have discovered all the truth at once. For she would have come upon her ladyship in a frame of mind almost as distraught as her own, and she might, had she penetrated the dressing room where her ladyship was, have come upon Richard Butler at the same time. Now, in view of what had happened, her ladyship, ever impulsive, was all for going there and then to her husband to confess the whole truth, without pausing to reflect upon the consequences to others than Ned Tremaine. As you know, it was beyond her to see a thing from 2 points of view at one and the same time. It was also beyond her brother. The failing, as I think I have told you, was a family one, and her brother saw this matter only from the point of view of his own safety. A single word to Terence, he had told her, put his back to the door of the dressing room to bar her intended egress, and you realize there will be a court-martial and a firing party for me. That warning effectively checked her. Yet certain stirrings of conscience made her think of the man who had imperiled himself for her sake and her brother's. But, Dick, what is to become of Ned? She had asked him. Oh, Ned will be all right. What is the evidence against him after all? Men are not shot for things they haven't done. Justice will leave Ned to shift for himself for the present. Anyhow, his danger isn't grave, nor is it immediate, and mine is. Helplessly distraught, she sank to an ottoman. The night had been a very trying one for her ladyship. She gave way to tears. It is all your fault, Dick, she reproached him. Naturally you would blame me, he said with resignation, the complete martyr. If only you had been ready at the time, as he told you to be, there would have been no delays, and you would have got away before any of this happened. Was it my fault that I should have reopened my wound? Bad luck to it. In attempting to get down that damn ladder, he asked her, is it my fault that I am neither an ape nor an acrobat? Tremaine should have come up at once to assist me, instead of waiting until he had to come up to help me bandage my leg again. Then time would not have been lost, and very likely my life with it. He came to a gloomy conclusion. Your life? What do you mean, Dick? Just that. What are my chances of getting away now? He asked her. Was there ever such infernal luck as mine? The Telemachus will sail without me, and the only man who could and would have helped me get out of this damn country is under arrest. It's clear I shall have to shift for myself again, and I can't even do that for a day or two with my leg in this state. I shall have to go back into that stuffy store cupboard of yours, till God knows when. He lost all self-control at the prospect and broke into imprecations of his luck. She attempted to soothe him, but he wasn't easy to soothe. And then, he grumbled on, you have so little sense that you want to run straight off to Terence and explain to him what Tremaine was doing here. You might at least have the grace to wait until I am off the premises, and give me the mercy of start before you set the dogs on my trail. Oh, Dick, you are so cruel, she protested. How can you say such things to me? whose only thought is for you, to save you. Then don't talk any more about telling Terrence, he replied. I won't, Dick. I won't. She drew him down beside her on the ottoman, and her fingers smoothed his rather tumbled red hair, just as her words attempted to smooth the ruffles in his spirit. You know, I didn't realize, or I should not have thought of it even. I was so concerned for Ned for the moment. Don't I tell you there's not the need? He assured her. Ned will be safe enough. Devil a doubt. It's for you to keep to what you told him from the balcony, that you heard a cry, went out to see what was happening, and saw Tremaine there bending over the body. Not a word more, and not a word less, or it will be all over with me. Chapter 14. The Champion. With the possible exception of her ladyship, I do not think that there was much sleep that night at Monsanto for any of the four chief actors in this tragicomedy. Each had his own preoccupations. Sylvie, as we know. Mr. Butler found his leg troubling him again, and the pain of the reopened wound must have prevented him from sleeping, even had his anxieties about his immediate future not suffice to do so. As for Sir Terence, his was the most deplorable case of all. This man who had lived a life of simple and downright honesty in great things and in small, a man who had never stooped to the slightest prevarication, found himself suddenly launched upon a most horrible and infamous course of duplicity to encompass the ruin of another. The offense of that other against himself might be the most foul and hideous, a piece of treachery that only treachery could adequately avenge. Yet this consideration was not enough to appease the clamors of Sir Terence's self-respect. In the end, however, the primary desire for vengeance and vengeance of the bitterest kind proved master of his mind. Captain Tremaine had been led by his villainy into a coil that should presently crush him, and Sir Terence promised himself an infinite balm for his outraged honor in the entertainment which the futile struggles of the victim should provide. With Captain Tremaine lay the cruel choice of submitting in tortured silence to his fate, or of turning craven and saving his miserable life by proclaiming himself a seducer and a betrayer. It should be interesting to observe how the captain would decide, and his punishment was certain whatever the decision that he took. Sir Terence came to breakfast in the open, gray-faced and haggard, but miraculously composed for a man who had so little studied the art of concealing his emotions. Voice and glance were calm as he gave a good morning to his wife and to Miss Armitage. "What are you going to do about Ned?" was one of his wife's first questions. It took him aback. He looked askance at her, marveling at the steadiness with which she bore his glance, until it occurred to him that effrontery was an essential part of the equipment of all harlots. "What am I going to do?" he echoed. "Why, nothing. The matter is out of my hands. I may be asked to give evidence. I may even be called to sit upon the court-martial that will try him. My evidence can hardly assist him. My conclusions will naturally be based upon the evidence that is laid before the court." Her teaspoon rattled in her saucer. "I don't understand you, Terence. Ned has always been your best friend. He has certainly shared everything that was mine. And you know," she went on, "that he did not kill Sam Oval." "Indeed?" His glance quickened a little. "How should I know that?" "Well, I know it, anyway." He seemed moved by that statement. He leaned forward with an odd eagerness, behind which there was something terrible that went unperceived by her. "Why did you not say so before? How do you know?" "What do you know?" "I am sure that he did not." Yes. But what makes you so sure? Do you possess some knowledge that you have not revealed?" He saw the color slowly shrinking from her cheeks under his burning gaze. So she was not quite shameless then, after all. There were limits to her effrontery. "What knowledge should I possess?" she filtered. "That is what I am asking." She made a good recovery. "I possess the knowledge that you should possess yourself," she told him. "I know Ned for a man incapable of such a thing. I am ready to swear that he could not have done it. I see. Evidence as a character." He sank back into his chair and thoughtfully stirred his chocolate. "It may weigh with the court, but I am not the court, and my mere opinions can do nothing for Ned Tremaine." Her ladyship looked at him wildly. "The court?" she cried. "Do you mean that I shall have to give evidence?" "Naturally," he answered. "You will have to say what you saw." But I saw nothing. Something, I think." "Yes, but nothing that can matter. Still, the court will wish to hear it, and perhaps to examine you upon it." "Oh, no." In her alarm, she half rose, then sank again to her chair. "You must keep me out of this, Terence. I really couldn't." He laughed with an affectation of indulgence, masking something else. "Why?" he said. "You would not deprive Tremaine of any of the advantages to be derived from your testimony. Are you not ready to bear witness as to his character? To swear that from your knowledge of the man, you are sure he could not have done such a thing? That he is the very soul of honor, a man incapable of anything base or treacherous or sly." And then at last Sylvia, who had been watching them, and seeking to apply to what she heard the wild expressions that Sir Terence had used to herself last night, broke into the conversation. "Why do you apply these words to Captain Tremaine?" she asked. He turned sharply to meet the opposition he detected in her. "I don't apply them. On the contrary, I say that, as Una knows, they are not applicable." "Then you make an unnecessary statement. A statement that has nothing to do with the case. Captain Tremaine has been arrested for killing Count Samoval in a duel. A duel may be a violation of the law as recently enacted by Lord Wellington, but it is not an offense against honor. And say that a man cannot have fought a duel because a man is incapable of anything base or treacherous or sly is just to say a very foolish and meaningless thing." "Oh, quite so," the adjutant admitted. "But if Tremaine denies having fought, if he shelters himself behind a falsehood and says that he has not killed Samoval, then I think the statement assumes some meaning." "Does Captain Tremaine say that?" she asked him sharply. "It is what I understood him to say last night when I ordered him under arrest." "Then," said Sylvia, with full conviction, "Captain Tremaine did not do it." "Perhaps he didn't," Sir Terence admitted. "The court will no doubt discover the truth. The truth, you know, must prevail." And he looked at his wife again, marking the fresh signs of agitation she betrayed. Mullins coming to set fresh covers, the conversation was allowed to lapse. Nor was it ever resumed, for at that moment, with no other announcement save such as was afforded by his quick step and the click-click of his spurs, a short, slight man entered the quadrangle from the doorway of the official wing. The adjutant, turning to look, caught his breath suddenly in an exclamation of astonishment. "Lord Wellington!" he cried, and was immediately on his feet. At the exclamation, the newcomer checked and turned. He wore a plain gray undress frock and white stock, buckskin breeches, and lacquered boots, and he carried a riding crop tucked under his left arm. His features were bold and sternly handsome, his fine eyes singularly piercing and keen in their glance, and the sweep of those eyes now took in not merely the adjutant, but the spread table and the ladies seated before it. He halted a moment, then advanced quickly, swept his cocked hat from a brown head that was but very slightly touched with gray, and bowed with mixture of stiffness and courtliness to the ladies. "Since I have intruded so unwittingly, I had best remain to make my apologies," he said. "I was on my way to your residential quarters. Omoe, not imagining that I should break in upon your privacy in this fashion." Omoe, with a great deference, made haste to reassure him on the score of the intrusion, whilst the ladies themselves rose to greet him. He bore her ladyship's hand to his lips with perfunctory courtesy, then insisted upon her resuming her chair. Then he bowed, ever with that mixture of stiffness and deference, to Miss Armitage upon her being presented to him by the adjutant. "Do not suffer me to disturb you," he begged them. "Sit down, Omoe. I am not pressed, and I shall be monstrous glad of a few moments' rest. You are very pleasant here." And he looked about the luxuriant garden with approving eyes. Sir Terence placed the hospitality of his table at his lordship's disposal, but the latter declined graciously. "A glass of wine and water, if you will. No more. I breakfasted at Torres Vedras with Fletcher." Then to the look of astonishment on the faces of the ladies, he smiled. "Oh, yes," he assured them. "I was early astir, for time is very precious just at present, which is why I drop unannounced upon you from the skies, Omoe." He took the glass that Mullins proffered on a salver, sipped from it, and set it down. "There is so much vexation, so much hindrance from these pestilential intriguers here in Lisbon, that I have thought it as well to come in person and speak plainly to the gentlemen of the Council of Regency." He was peeling off his stout riding gloves as he spoke. "If this campaign is to go forward at all, it will go forward as I dispose. Then, too, I want to see Fletcher and the works. By gad, Omoe, he has performed miracles, and I am very pleased with him. Oh, and with you too. He told me how ably you have seconded him and counseled him where necessary. You must have worked night and day, Omoe." He sighed. I wish that I were as well served in every direction. And then he broke off abruptly. But this is monstrous tedious for your ladyship, and for you, Miss Armitage. Forgive me. Her ladyship protested the contrary, professing a deep interest in military matters, and inviting his lordship to continue. Lord Wellington, however, ignoring the invitation, turned the conversation upon life in Lisbon, inquiring hopefully whether they found the place afforded them adequate entertainment. Indeed, yes, Lady Omo assured him. We are very gay at times. There are private theatricals and dances, occasionally an official ball, and we are promised picnics and water parties now that the summer is here. And in the autumn, ma'am, we may find you a little hunting, his lordship promised them. Plenty of foxes, a rough country, though, but what's that to an Irish woman? He caught the quickening of Miss Armitage's eye. The prospect interests you, I see. Miss Armitage admitted it, and thus they made conversation for a while. What time the great soldier sipped his wine and water to wash the dust of his morning ride from his throat. When at last he set down an empty glass, Sir Terence took this as the intimation of his readiness to deal with official matters, and rising, he announced himself entirely at his lordship's service. Lord Wellington claimed his attention for a full hour with the details of several matters that are not immediately concerned with this narrative. Having done, he rose at last from Sir Terence's desk, at which he had been sitting, and took up his riding crop and cocked hat from the chair where he had placed them. And now, he said, I think I will ride into Lisbon and endeavor to come to an understanding with Count Redondo and Don Miguel Forges. Sir Terence advanced to open the door, but Wellington checked him with a sudden sharp inquiry. You published my order against dueling, did you not? Immediately upon receiving it, sir. It doesn't seem to have taken long for the order to be infringed, then. His manner was severe, his eyes stern. Sir Terence was conscious of a quickening of his pulses. Nevertheless, his answer was calmly regretful. I am afraid not. The great man nodded. Disgraceful? I heard of it from Fletcher this morning. Captain Watts' name had just reported himself under arrest, I understand, and Fletcher had received a note from you giving the grounds for this. The deplorable part of these things is that they always happen in the most troublesome manner conceivable. In Berkeley's case, the victim was a nephew of the patriarchs. Samoval, now, was a person of even greater consequence, a close friend of several members of the council. His death will be deeply resented and may set up fresh difficulties. It is monstrous vexatious. And abruptly he asked, what did they quarrel about? Omoe trembled, and his glance avoided the other's gimlet eye. The only quarrel that I am aware of between them, he said, was concerned with this very enactment of your lordships. Samoval proclaimed it infamous, and Tremaine resented the term. Hot words passed between them, but the altercation was allowed to go no further at the time by myself and others who were present. His lordship had raised his brows. By gad, sir, he ejaculated, there almost appears to be some justification for the captain. He was one of your military secretaries, was he not? He was. Pity. His lordship was thoughtful for a moment. Then he dismissed the matter. But then orders are orders, and soldiers must learn to obey implicitly. British soldiers of all degrees seem to find the lesson difficult. We must inculcate it more sternly. That is all. Omoe's honest soul was in torturing revolt against the falsehoods he had implied. And to this man of all men, to this man whom he reverenced above all others, who stood to him for the very fount of military honor and lofty principle, he was in such a mood that one more question on the subject from Wellington, and the whole ghastly truth must have come pouring from his lips. But no other question came. Instead, his lordship turned on the threshold and held out his hand. Not a step farther, Omoe. I've left you a mass of work, and you are short of a secretary. So don't waste any of your time on courtesies. I shall hope still to find the ladies in the garden, so that I may take my leave without inconveniencing them. And he was gone, stepping briskly with clicking spurs, leaving Omoe hunched now in his chair, his body the very expression of the dejection that filled his soul. In the garden his lordship came upon Miss Armitage alone, still seated by the table under the trellis, from which the cloth had by now been removed. She rose at his approach, and in spite of gesture to her, to remain seated. I was seeking Lady Omoe, said he, to take my leave of her. I may not have the pleasure of coming to Monsanto again. She is on the terrace, I think, said Miss Armitage. I will find her for your lordship. Let's find her together, he said amiably, and so turned and went with her toward the archway. You said your name is Armitage, I think, he commented. Sir Terence said so. His eyes twinkled. You possess an exceptional virtue, said he. To be truthful is common, to be accurate rare. Well, then, Sir Terence said so. Once I had a great friend of the name of Armitage. I have lost sight of him these many years. We were at school together in Brussels. At Monsieur Goubert's, she surprised him by saying, That would be John Armitage, my uncle. God bless my soul, ma'am, he ejaculated. But I gathered you were Irish, and Jack Armitage came from Yorkshire. My mother is Irish, and we live in Ireland now. I was born there, but father, nonetheless, was John Armitage's brother. He looked at her with increased interest, marking the straight, supple lines of her in the handsome, high-bred face. His lordship, remember, never lacked an appreciative eye for a fine woman. So you're Jack Armitage's niece. Give me news of him, my dear. She did so. Jack Armitage was well and prospering, had made a rich marriage and retired from the blues many years ago to live at Northampton. He listened with interest, and thus out of his boyhood friendship for her uncle, which of late years he had had no opportunity to express, sprang there, and then a kindness for the niece. Her own personal charms may have contributed to it, for the great soldier was intensely responsive to the appeal of beauty. They reached the terrace. Lady O'Moy was nowhere in sight, but Lord Wellington was too much engrossed in his discovery to be troubled. My dear, he said, if I can serve you at any time, both for Jack's sake and your own, I hope that you will let me know of it. She looked at him a moment, and he saw her color come and go, arguing a sudden agitation. You tempt me, sir, she said, with a wistful smile. Then yield to the temptation, child. He urged her kindly, those keen, penetrating eyes of his perceiving trouble here. It isn't for myself, she responded. Yet there is something I would ask you if I dare, something I had intended to ask you in any case if I could find opportunity. To be frank, that is why I was waiting there in the garden just now. It was to waylay you. I hope for a word with you. Well, he encouraged her. It should be the easier now, since in a sense we find that we are old friends. He was so kind, so gentle, despite that stern, strong face of his, that she melted at once to his persuasion. It is about Lieutenant Richard Butler, she began. Ah, said he lightly. I feared as much when you said it was not for yourself you had a favor to ask. But looking at him, she instantly perceived how he had misunderstood her. Mr. Butler, she said, is the officer who was guilty of the affair at Tavora. He knit his brow in thought. Butler Tavora, he muttered questioningly. Suddenly his memory found what it was seeking. Oh, yes, the violated nunnery. His thin lips tightened. The sternness of his ace increased. Yes, he inquired, but the tone was now forbidding. Nevertheless, she was not deterred. Mr. Butler is Lady O'Moy's brother, she said. He stared a moment, taken aback. Good God, you don't say so, child. Her brother, O'Moy's brother-in-law. And O'Moy never said a word to me about it. What should he say? Sir Terence himself pledged his word to the Council of Regency that Mr. Butler would be shot when taken. Did he, egad? He was still further surprised out of his sternness. Something of a Roman, this O'Moy, in his conception of duty. The Council no doubt demanded this. So I understand, my lord. Lady O'Moy, realizing her brother's grave danger, is very deeply troubled. Naturally, he agreed. But what can I do, Miss Armitage? What were the actual facts? Do you happen to know? She recited them, putting the case bravely for the scapegrace, Mr. Butler, dwelling particularly upon the error under which he was laboring, that he had imagined himself to be knocking at the gates of a monastery of Dominican friars, that he had broken into the convent because denied admittance, and because he suspected some treacherous reason for that denial. He heard her out, watching her with those keen eyes of his the while. You make out so good a case for him that one might almost believe you instructed by the gentleman himself. Yet I gather that nothing has since been heard of him. Nothing, sir, since he vanished from Tavora nearly 2 months ago. and I have only repeated to your lordship the tale that was told by the sergeant and the troopers who reported the matter to Sir Robert Crawford on their return." He was very thoughtful. Leaning on the balustrade, he looked out across the sunlit valley, turning his boldly chiseled profile to his companion. At last he spoke slowly, reflectively. "But if this were really so, a mere blunder, I see no sufficient grounds to threaten him with capital punishment. His subsequent desertion, if he has deserted, I mean if nothing has happened to him, is really the graver matter of the two. I gathered, sir, that he was to be sacrificed to the Council of Regency, a sort of scapegoat." He swung round sharply, and the sudden blaze of his eyes almost terrified her. Instantly, he was cold again and inscrutable. "Ah, you are oddly well informed throughout. But of course you would be," he added, with an appraising look into that intelligent face in which he now caught a faint likeness of Jack Armitage. Well, my dear, I am very glad you have told me of this. If Mr. Butler is ever taken and in danger, there will be a court-martial, of course. Send me word of it, and I will see what I can do, both for your sake and for the sake of strict justice." "Oh, not for my sake," she protested, reddening slightly at the gentle imputation. "Mr. Butler is nothing to me. That is to say, he is just my cousin. It is for Una's sake that I am asking this." "Why, then, for Lady Omoyes's sake, since you ask it," he replied readily. "But," he warned her, "say nothing of it until Mr. Butler is found. It is possible he believed that Butler never will be found. And remember, I promise only to give the matter my attention, if it is as you represent it. I think you may be sure that the worst that will befall Mr. Butler will be dismissal from the service. He deserves that. But I hope I should be the last man to permit a British officer to be used as a scapegoat or a burnt offering to mob or to any council regency. By the way, who told you this about a scapegoat?" "Captain Tremaine." "Captain Tremaine? Oh, the man who killed Sam Oval." "He didn't," she cried. On that almost fierce denial his lordship looked at her, raising his eyebrows in astonishment. "But I am told that he did, and he is under arrest for it this moment, for that, and for breaking my order against dueling." "You were not told the truth, my lord. Captain Tremaine says that he didn't, and if he says so, it is so." "Oh, of course, Miss Armitage." He was a man of unparalleled valor and boldness, yet so fierce was she in that moment that for the life of him he dared not have contradicted her. "Captain Tremaine is the most honorable man I know," she continued, "and if he had killed Sam Oval, he would never have denied it. He would have proclaimed it to all the world." "There is no need for all this heat, my dear," he reassured her. "The point is not one that can remain in doubt. The seconds of the duel will be forthcoming, and they will tell us who were the principals." "There were no seconds," she informed him. "No seconds," he cried in horror. "Do you mean they just fought a rough and tumble fight?" "I mean they never fought at all. As for this tale of a duel, I ask your lordship, had Captain Tremaine desired a secret meeting with Count Samoval, would he have chosen this of all places in which to hold it? The fight, whoever fought it, took place in the quadrangle there at midnight. He was overcome with astonishment, and he showed it. 'Upon my soul,' he said, 'I do not appear to have been told any of the facts.' 'Strange that Omoe should never have mentioned that,' he muttered, and then inquired suddenly, 'Where was Tremaine arrested?' 'Here,' she informed him. 'Here? He was here, then, at midnight? What was he doing here?' 'I don't know. But whatever he was doing, can your lordship believe that he would have come here to fight a secret duel?' 'It certainly puts a monstrous strain upon belief,' said he. 'But what can he have been doing here?' 'I don't know,' she repeated. She wanted to add a warning of Omoe. She was tempted to tell his lordship of the odd words that Omoe had used to her last night concerning Tremaine, but she hesitated, and her courage failed her. Lord Wellington was so great a man, bearing the destinies of nations on his shoulders, and already he had wasted upon her so much of the time that belonged to the world and history, that she feared to trespass further. And while she hesitated came Calhoun Grant clanking across the quadrangle, looking for his lordship. He had come up, he announced, standing straight and stiff before them, to see Omoe, but hearing of Lord Wellington's presence, had preferred to see his lordship in the first instance. 'And indeed you arrived very opportunely, Grant,' his lordship confessed. He turned to take his leave of Jack Armitage's niece. I'll not forget either Mr. Butler or Captain Tremaine, he promised her, and his stern face softened into a gentle, friendly smile. They are very fortunate in their champion. Chapter 15. The Wallet. A queer, mysterious business, this death of Sam Oval, said Colonel Grant. So I was beginning to perceive, Wellington agreed, his brow dark. They were alone together in the quadrangle under the trellis, through which the sun, already high, was dappling the table at which his lordship sat. It would be easier to read if it were not for the dueling swords. Those and the nature of Samoval's wound certainly point unanswerably to a duel. Otherwise, there would be considerable evidence that Samoval was a spy caught in the act and dealt without a hand as he deserved. How? Count Samoval a spy. In the French interest, answered the colonel without emotion, acting upon the instructions of the Sousa faction, whose tool he had become. And Colonel Grant proceeded to relate precisely what he knew of Samoval. Lord Wellington sat a while in silence, cogitating. Then he rose, and his piercing eyes looked up at the colonel, who stood a good head taller than himself. Is this the evidence of which you spoke? By no means, was the answer. The evidence I secured is much more palpable. I have it here. He produced a little wallet of red morocco bearing the initial S surmounted by a coronet. Opening it, he selected from it some papers, speaking the while. I thought it as well before I left last night to make an examination of the body. This is what I found, and it contains, among other lesser documents, these to which I would draw your lordship's attention. First this, and he placed in Lord Wellington's hand a holograph note from the Prince of Esslingen introducing the bearer, M. de la Flèche, his confidential agent, who would consult with the Count, and thanking the Count for the valuable information already received from him. His lordship sat down again to read the letter. It is a full confirmation of what you have told me, he said calmly. Then this, said Colonel Grant, and he placed upon the table a note in French of the approximate number and disposition of the British troops in Portugal at the time. The handwriting is Samoval's own, as those who know it will have no difficulty in discerning. And now this, sir. He unfolded a small sketch map, bearing the title also in French, probable position and extent of the fortifications north of Lisbon. The notes at the foot, he added, are in cipher, and it is the ordinary cipher employed by the French, which in itself proves how deeply Samoval was involved. Here is a translation of it, and he placed before his chief a sheet of paper, on which Lord Wellington read. This is based upon my own personal knowledge of the country, odd scraps of information received from time to time, and my personal verification of the roads closed to traffic in that region. It is intended merely as a guide to the actual locale of the fortifications, an exact plan of which I hope shortly to obtain. His lordship considered it very attentively, but without betraying the least discomposure. For a man working upon such slight data, as he himself confesses, was a quiet comment. He is damnably accurate. It is as well, I think, that this did not reach Marshal Messina. My own assumption is that he put off sending it, intending to replace it by the actual plan, which he here confesses to the expectation of obtaining shortly. I think he died at the right moment. Anything else? Indeed, said Colonel Grant. I have kept the best for the last. And unfolding yet another document, he placed it in the hands of the Commander-in-Chief. It was Lord Liverpool's note of the troops to be embarked for Lisbon in June and July. The note abstracted from the dispatch carried by Captain Garfield. His lordship's lips tightened as he considered it. His death was timely indeed, damn timely, and the man who killed him deserves to be mentioned in dispatches. Nothing else, I suppose. The rest is of little consequence, sir. Very well. He rose. You will leave these with me, and the wallet as well, if you please. I am on my way to confer with the members of the Council of Regency, and I am glad to go armed with so stout a weapon as this. Whatever may be the ultimate finding of the court-martial, the present assumption must be that Samoval met the death of the spy caught in the act, as you suggested. That is the only conclusion the Portuguese government can draw when I lay these papers before it. They will effectively silence all protests. Shall I tell Omoe? Inquired the colonel. Oh, certainly, answered his lordship, instantly to change his mind. Stay. He considered, his chin in his hand, his eyes dreamy. Better not, perhaps. Better not tell anybody. Let us keep this to ourselves for the present. It has no direct bearing on the matter to be tried. By the way, when does the court-martial sit? I had just heard that Marshal Beresford has ordered it to sit on Thursday here at Monsanto. His lordship considered. Perhaps I shall be present. I may be at Torres Vedras until then. It is a very odd affair. What is your own impression of it, Grant? Have you formed any? Grant smiled darkly. I have been piecing things together. The result is rather curious, and still very mystifying. Still leaving a deal to be explained, and somehow this wallet doesn't fit into the scheme at all. You shall tell me about it as we ride into Lisbon. I want you to come with me. Lady Omoe must forgive me if I take French leave, since she is nowhere to be found. The truth was that her ladyship had purposely gone into hiding, after the fashion of suffering animals that are denied expression of their pain. She had gone off with her load of sorrow and anxiety into the thicket on the flank of Monsanto, and there Sylvia found her presently, dejectedly seated by a spring on a bank that was thick with flowering violets. Her ladyship was in tears, her mind swollen to bursting point by the secret which it sought to contain, but felt itself certainly unable to contain much longer. "Why, Una dear," cried Miss Armitage, kneeling beside her and putting a motherly arm about that full-grown child. "What is this?" Her ladyship wept copiously, the springs of her grief gushing forth in response to that sympathetic touch. "Oh, my dear, I am so distressed. I shall go mad, I think. I am sure I have never deserved all this trouble. I have always been considerate of others. You know I wouldn't give pain to anyone. And Dick has always been so thoughtless." "Dick?" said Miss Armitage, and there was less sympathy in her voice. "It is Dick you are thinking about at present?" "Of course. All this trouble has come through Dick. I mean," she recovered, "that all my troubles began with this affair of Dick's. And now there is Ned under arrest and to be court-martialed. But what has Captain Tremaine to do with Dick?" "Nothing, of course," her ladyship agreed, with more than usual self-restraint. "But it's one trouble on another. Oh, it's more than I can bear." "I know, my dear, I know," Miss Armitage said soothingly, and her own voice was not so steady. "You don't know. How can you? It isn't your brother or your friend. It isn't as if you cared very much for either of them. If you did, if you loved Dick or Ned, you might realize what I am suffering." Miss Armitage's eyes looked straight ahead into the thick green foliage, and there was an odd smile, half wistful, half scornful, on her lips. "Yet I have done what I could," she said presently. "I have spoken to Lord Wellington about them both." Lady Omoe checked her tears to look at her companion, and there was dread in her eyes. "You have spoken to Lord Wellington?" "Yes. The opportunity came, and I took it. And whatever did you tell him?" She was all a tremble now, as she clutched Miss Armitage's hand. Miss Armitage related what had passed, how she had explained the true facts of Dick's case to his lordship, how she had protested her faith that Tremaine was incapable of lying, and that if he said he had not killed Sam Oval, it was certain that he had not done so, and finally, how his lordship had promised to bear both cases in his mind. "That doesn't seem very much," her ladyship complained. "But he said that he would never allow a British officer to be made a scapegoat, and that if things proved to be as I stated them, he would see that the worst that happened to Dick would be his dismissal from the army. He asked me to let him know immediately if Dick were found." More than ever was her ladyship on the very edge of confiding. A chance word might have broken down the last barrier of her will, but that word was not spoken, and so she was given the opportunity of first consulting her brother. He laughed when he heard the story. "A trap to take me, that's all," he pronounced it. "My dear girl, that stiff-necked martinet knows nothing of forgiveness for a military offense. Discipline is the god at whose shrine he worships." And he afforded her anecdotes to illustrate and confirm his assertion of Lord Wellington's ruthlessness. "I tell you," he concluded, "it's nothing but a trap to catch me, and if you had been fool enough to yield and to have blabbed of my presence to Sylvia, you would have had it proved to you." She was terrified and of course convinced, for she was easy of conviction, believing always the last person to whom she spoke. She sat down on one of the boxes that furnished that cheerless refuge of Mr. Butler's. "Then what's become of Ned?" she cried. "Oh, I had hoped that we had found a way out at last." He raised himself on his elbow on the camp bed they had fitted up for him. "Be easy now," he bade her impatiently. They can't do anything to Ned until they find him guilty. And how are they going to find him guilty when he's innocent? Yes, but the appearances. Fiddlesticks, he answered her. And the expression chosen was a mere concession to her sex, and not at all what Mr. Butler intended. Appearances can't establish guilt. Do be sensible, and remember that they will have to prove that he killed Sam Oval. And you can't prove a thing to be what it isn't. You can't. Are you sure? Certain sure, he replied with emphasis. Do you know that I shall have to give evidence before the court? She announced resentfully. It was an announcement that gave him pause. Thoughtfully, he stroked his abominable tuft of red beard. Then he dismissed the matter with a shrug and a smile. Well, and what of it? He cried. They are not likely to bully you or cross-examine you. Just tell them what you saw from the balcony. Indeed, you can't very well say anything else, or they will see that you are lying, and then heaven alone knows what may happen to you, as well as to me. She got up in a pet. You're callous, Dick, callous, she told him. Oh, I wish you had never come to me for shelter. He looked at her and sneered. That's a matter you can soon mend, he told her. Call up Terence and the others and have me shot. I promise I shall make no resistance. You see, I'm not able to resist even if I would. Oh, how can you think it? She was indignant. Well, what is a poor devil to think? You blow hot and cold all in a breath. I'm sick and ill and feverish, he continued with self-pity. And now even you find me a trouble. I wish to God they'd shoot me and make an end. I'm sure it would be best for everybody. And now she was on her knees beside him, soothing him, protesting that he had misunderstood her, that she had meant. Oh, she didn't know what she had meant. She was so distressed on his account. And there's never the need to be, he assured her. Surely you can be guided by me if you want to help me. As soon as ever my leg gets well again, I'll be after fending for myself, and trouble you no further. But if you want to shelter me until then, do it thoroughly, and don't give way to fear at every shadow without substance that falls across your path. She promised it, and on that promise left him. And believing him, she bore herself more cheerfully for the remainder of the day. But that evening after they had dined, her fears and anxieties drove her at last to seek her natural and legal protector. Sir Terence had sauntered off towards the house, gloomy and silent as he'd been throughout the meal. She ran after him now, and came tripping lightly at his side up the steps. She put her arm through his. Terence, dear, you're not going back to work again? She pleaded. He stopped, and from his fine height looked down upon her with a curious smile. Slowly he disengaged his arm from the clasp of her own. I am afraid I must, he answered coldly. I have a great deal to do, and I am short of a secretary. When this inquiry is over, I shall have more time to myself, perhaps. There was something so repellent in his voice, in his manner of uttering those last words, that she stood rebuffed and watched him vanish into the building. Then she stamped her foot, and her pretty mouth trembled. Oaf, she said aloud. Chapter 16. The Evidence. The board of officers convened by Marshal Beresford to form the court that was to try Captain Tremaine was presided over by General Sir Harry Stapleton, who was in command of the British troops quartered in Lisbon. It included, amongst others, the Adjutant General, Sir Terence O'Moy, Colonel Fletcher of the Engineers, who had come in haste from Torres Vedras, having first desired to be included in the board chiefly on account of his friendship for Tremaine, and Major Carruthers. The Judge Advocate's task of conducting the case against the prisoner was deputed to the quartermaster of Tremaine's own regiment, Major Swan. The court sat in a long, cheerless hall, once the refectory of the Franciscans, who had been the first tenants of Monsanto. It was stone-flagged. The windows set a height of some 10 feet from the ground. The bare, whitewashed walls hung with very wooden portraits of long-departed kings and princes of Portugal who had been benefactors of the order. The court occupied the abbot's table, which was set on a shallow dais at the end of the room, a table of stone with a covering of oak, over which a green cloth had been spread. The officers, 12 in number, besides the president, sat with their backs to the wall, immediately under the inevitable picture of the Last Supper. The court being sworn, Captain Tremaine was brought in by the provost marshal's guard and given a stool placed immediately before and a few paces from the table. Perfectly calm and imperturbable, he saluted the court and sat down, his guards remaining some paces behind him. He had declined all offers of a friend to represent him, on the grounds that the court could not possibly afford him a case to answer. The president, a florid, rather pompous man, who spoke with a faint lisp, cleared his throat and read the charge against the prisoner from the sheet with which he had been supplied. The charge of having violated the recent enactment against dueling made by the commander-in-chief of His Majesty's forces in the peninsula, insofar as he had fought, a duel with Count Geronimo de Samoval, and of murder insofar as that duel, conducted in an irregular manner and without any witnesses, had resulted in the death of the said Count Geronimo de Samoval. How say you then, Captain Tremaine? The judge advocate challenged him. Are you guilty of these charges or not guilty? Not guilty. The president sat back and observed the prisoner with an eye that was officially benign. Tremaine's glance considered the court and met the concerned and grave regard of his colonel, of his friend Carruthers, and of two other friends of his own regiment, the cold indifference of 3 officers of the 14th, then stationed in Lisbon with whom he was unacquainted, and the utter inscrutability of Omoi's rather lowering glance, which profoundly intrigued him, and lastly, the official hostility of Major Swan, who was on his feet, setting forth the case against him. Of the remaining members of the court, he took no heed. From the opening address, it did not seem to Captain Tremaine as if this case would have been hurriedly prepared by Major Swan. Chiefly that same morning would amount to very much. Briefly, the Major announced his intention of establishing, to the satisfaction of the court, how, on the night of the 28th of May, the prisoner, in flagrant violation of an enactment in a general order of the 26th of that same month, had engaged in a duel with Count Geronimo de Samoval, a peer of the realm of Portugal. Followed a short statement of the case from the point of view of the prosecution, an anticipation of the evidence to be called, upon which the Major thought, rather sanguinely, opined Captain Tremaine, to convict the accused. He concluded with an assurance that the evidence of the prisoner's guilt was as nearly direct as evidence could be in a case of murder. The first witness called was the butler Mullins. He was introduced by the sergeant major stationed by the double doors at the end of the hall from the anteroom, where the witnesses commanded to be present were in waiting. Mullins, rather less venerable than usual, as a consequence of agitation and affliction on behalf of Captain Tremaine, to whom he was attached, stated nervously the facts within his knowledge. He was occupied with the silver in his pantry, having remained up in case Sir Terence, who was working late in his study, should require anything before going to bed. Sir Terence called him, and, "At what time did Sir Terence call you?" asked the Major. "It was 10 minutes past 12, sir, by the clock in my pantry." "You're sure that the clock was right?" "Quite sure, sir. I had put it right that same evening." "Very well. Then, Sir Terence called you at 10 minutes past 12. Pray continue." "He gave me a letter addressed to the Commissary General. 'Take that,' says he, 'to the Sergeant of the Guard at once, and tell him to be sure that it is forwarded to the Commissary General first thing in morning.' I went out at once, and on the lawn in the quadrangle, I saw a man lying on his back on the grass, and another man kneeling beside him. I ran across to them. It was a bright, moonlight night, bright as day it was, and you could see quite clear. The gentleman that was kneeling looks up at me, and I sees it was Captain Tremaine, sir. 'What's this, Captain dear?' says I. 'It's Count Samoval, and he's kilt,' says he. 'For God's sake, go and fetch somebody.' So I ran back to tell Sir Terence. And Sir Terence, he came out with me, and mighty startled he was at what he found there. 'What's happened?' says he, and the captain answers him just as he had answered me. 'It's Count Samoval, and he's kilt.' 'But how did it happen?' says Sir Terence. 'Sure, and that's just what I want to know,' says the captain. 'I found him here.' And then Sir Terence turns to me, and Mullins, says he, 'just fetch the guard.' And of course, I went at once." "Was there anyone else present?" asked the prosecutor. "Not in the quadrangle, sir, but Lady Omoe was on the balcony of her room all the time." "Well, then you fetched the guard. What happened when you returned?" "Colonel Grant arrived, sir, and I understood him to say that he had been following Count Samoval." "Which way did Colonel Grant come?" put in the president. "By the gate from the terrace." "Was it open?" "No, sir. Sir Terence himself went to open the wicket when Colonel Grant knocked." Sir Harry nodded, and Major Swan resumed the examination. "What happened next?" Sir Terence ordered the captain under arrest. "Did Captain Tremaine submit at once?" "Well, Not quite at once, sir. He naturally made some bother. Good God, he says. You'll never be after thinking I killed him? I tell you I just found him here like this. What were ye doing here, then? Says Sir Terence. I was coming to see you, says the captain. What about? Says Sir Terence. And with that the captain got angry, said he refused to be cross-questioned, and went off to report himself under arrest as he was bid. That closed the butler's evidence, and the judge advocate looked across at the prisoner. Have you any questions of the witness? He inquired. None, replied Captain Tremaine. He has given his evidence very faithfully and accurately. Major Swan invited the court to question the witness in any manner it considered desirable. The only one to avail himself of the invitation was Carruthers, who, out of his friendship and concern for Tremaine, and a conviction of Tremaine's innocence begotten chiefly by that friendship, desired to bring out anything that might tell in his favor. What was Captain Tremaine's bearing when he spoke to you and to Sir Terence? Quite as usual, sir. He was quite calm, not at all perturbed. Devil a bit. Not until Sir Terence ordered him under arrest, and then he was a little hot. Thank you, Mullins. Dismissed by the court, Mullins would have departed, but that upon being told by the sergeant major that he was at liberty to remain if he chose, he found a seat on one of the benches ranged against the wall. The next witness was Sir Terence, who gave his evidence quietly from his place at the board immediately on the president's right. He was pale, but otherwise composed, and the first part of his evidence was no more than a confirmation of what Mullins had said, an exact and strictly truthful statement of the circumstances as he had witnessed them from a moment when Mullins had summoned him. You were present, I believe, Sir Terence, said Major Swan, at an altercation that arose on the previous day between Captain Tremaine and the deceased. Yes, it happened at lunch here at Monsanto. What was the nature of it? Count Samoval permitted himself to criticize adversely Lord Wellington's enactment against dueling, and Captain Tremaine defended it. They became a little heated, and the fact was mentioned that Samoval himself was a famous swordsman. Captain Tremaine made the remark that famous swordsmen were required by Count Samoval's country to save it from invasion. The remark was offensive to the deceased, and although the subject was abandoned out of regard for the ladies present, it was abandoned on a threat from Count Samoval to continue it later. Was it so continued? Of that I have no knowledge. Invited to cross-examine the witness. Captain Tremaine again declined, admitting freely that all that Sir Terence had said was strictly true. Then Carruthers, who appeared to be intent to act as the prisoner's friend, took up the examination of his chief. It is of course admitted that Captain Tremaine enjoyed free access to Monsanto practically at all hours in his capacity as your military secretary. Sir Terence? Admitted, said Sir Terence. And it is therefore possible that he might have come upon the body of the deceased just as Mullins came upon it. It is possible, certainly. The evidence to come will no doubt determine whether it is a tenable opinion. Admitting this, then, the attitude in which Captain Tremaine was discovered would be a perfectly natural one. It would be natural that he should investigate the identity and hurt of the man he found there. Certainly. But it would hardly be natural that he should linger by the body of a man he had himself slain, thereby incurring the risk of being discovered? That is a question for the court rather than for me. Thank you, Sir Terence. And as no one else desired to question him, Sir Terence resumed his seat, and Lady Omoe was called. She came in very white and trembling, accompanied by Miss Armitage, whose admittance was suffered by the court, since she would not be called upon to give evidence. One of the officers of the 14th seated on the extreme right of the table made gallant haste to set a chair for her ladyship, which she accepted gratefully. The oath administered, she was invited gently by Major Swan to tell the court what she knew of the case before them. But I know nothing, she faltered in evident distress. And Sir Terence, his elbow leaning on the table, covered his mouth with his hand that its movements might not betray him. His eyes glowered upon her with ferocity that was hardly dissembled. If you will take the trouble to tell the court what you saw from your balcony, the Major insisted, the court will be grateful. Perceiving her agitation and attributing it to nervousness, moved also by that delicate loveliness of hers, and by deference to the adjutant generate's lady, Sir Harry Stapleton intervened. Is Lady Omoe's evidence really necessary? He asked. Does it contribute any fresh fact regarding the discovery of the body? No, sir, Major Swan admitted. It is merely a corroboration of what we have already heard from Mullins and Sir Terence. Then why unnecessarily distress this lady? Oh, for my own part, sir, the prosecutor was submitting when Sir Terence cut in. I think that in the prisoner's interest, perhaps Lady Omoe will not mind being distressed a little. It was at her he looked, and for her and Tremaine alone, that he intended the cutting lash of sarcasm, concealed from the rest of the court by his smooth accent. Mullins has said, I think, that her ladyship was on the balcony when he came into the quadrangle. Her evidence, therefore, takes us further back in point of time than does Mullins's. Again, the sarcastic double meaning was only for those two. Considering that the prisoner is being tried for his life, I do not think we should miss anything that may, however slightly, affect our judgment. Sir Terence is right. I think, sir, the judge advocate supported. Very well, then, said the president. Proceed, if you please. Will you be good enough to tell the court, Lady Omoe, how you came to be upon the balcony? Her pallor had deepened, and her eyes looked more than ordinarily large and childlike as they turned this way and that to survey the members of the court. Nervously, she dabbed her lips with a handkerchief before answering mechanically as she had been schooled. I heard a cry and I ran out. You were in bed at the time, of course? Quoth her husband, interrupting. What on earth has that to do with it, Sir Terence? The president rebuked him, out of his earnest desire to cut this examination as short as possible. The question, sir, does not seem to me to be without point, replied Omoe. He was judicially smooth and self-contained. It is intended to enable us to form an opinion as to the lapse of time between her ladyship's hearing the cry and reaching the balcony. Grudgingly, the president admitted the point, and the question was repeated. Yes, came Lady Omoe's tremulous, faltering answer. I was in bed. But not asleep, or were you asleep? Rapped Omoe again, and in answer to the president's impatient glance again explained himself. We should know whether perhaps the cry might not have been repeated several times before her ladyship heard it. That is of value. It would be more regular, ventured the judge advocate, if Sir Terence would reserve his examination of the witness until she has given her evidence. Very well, grumbled Sir Terence, and he sat back, foiled for the moment in his deliberate intent to torture her into admissions that must betray her if made. I was not asleep, she told the court, thus answering her husband's last question. I heard the cry and ran to the balcony at once. That is all. But what did you see from the balcony? Asked Major Swan. It was night, and of course, it was dark, she answered. Surely not dark, Lady Omoe. There was a moon, I think a full moon. Yes, but there was a good deal of shadow in the garden, and I couldn't see anything at first. But you did eventually? Oh, eventually. Yes, eventually. Her fingers were twisting and untwisting the handkerchief they held, and her distressed loveliness was very piteous to see. Yet it seems to have occurred to none of them that this distress and the minor contradictions into which it led her were the result of her intent to conceal the truth, of her terror lest it should nevertheless be wrung from her. Only Omoe, watching her and reading in her every word and glance and gesture the signs of her falsehood, knew the hideous thing she strove to hide, even, it seemed, at the cost of her lover's life. To his lacerated soul her torture was a balm. Gloating, he watched her, then, and watched her lover, marveling at the blackguard's complete self-mastery and impassivity even now. Major Swan was urging her gently. Eventually, then, what was it that you saw? I saw a man lying on the ground and another kneeling over him, and then, almost at once, Mullins came out, and... I don't think we need take this any further, Major Swan. The president again interposed. We have heard what happened after Mullins came out. Unless the prisoner wishes, began the judge advocate. By no means, said Tremaine composedly. Although outwardly impassive, he had been watching her intently, and it was his eyes that perturbed her more than anything in that court. It was she who must determine for him how to proceed, how far to defend himself. He had hoped that by now Dick Butler might have been got away, so that it would have been safe to tell the whole truth, although he began to doubt how far that could avail him. How far, indeed, it would be believed in the absence of Dick Butler. Her evidence told him that such hopes as he may have entertained had been idle, and that he must depend for his life simply upon the court's inability to bring the guilt home to him. In this he had some confidence, for, knowing himself innocent, it seemed to him incredible that he could be proven guilty. Failing that, nothing short of the discovery of the real slayer of Samoval could save him, and that was a matter wrapped in the profoundest mystery. The only man who could conceivably have fought Sam Oval in such a place was Sir Terence himself. But then it was utterly inconceivable that in that case Sir Terence, who was a very soul of honor, should not only keep silent and allow another man to suffer, but actually sit there in judgment upon that other. And besides, there was no quarrel, nor ever had been, between Sir Terence and Sam Oval. There is, Major Swan was saying, just one other matter upon which I should like to question Lady Omoe. And thereupon he proceeded to do so. Your ladyship will remember that on the day before the event in which Count Samoval met his death, he was on a small luncheon party at your house here in Monsanto. Yes, she replied, wondering fearfully what might be coming now. Would your ladyship be good enough to tell the court who were the other members of that party? It was hardly a party, sir, she answered, with her unconquerable insistence upon trifles. We were just Sir Terence and myself, Miss Armitage, Count Samoval, Colonel Grant, Major Carruthers, and Captain Tremaine. Can your ladyship recall any words that passed between the deceased and Captain Tremaine on that occasion? Words of disagreement, I mean. She knew that there had been something, but in her benumbed state of mind, she was incapable of remembering what it was. All that remained in her memory was Sylvia's warning after she and her cousin had left the table, Sylvia's insistence that she should call Captain Tremaine away to avoid trouble between himself and the Count. But, search as she would, the actual subject of disagreement eluded her. Moreover, it occurred to her suddenly and sowed fresh terror in her soul that, whatever it was, it would tell against Captain Tremaine. I am afraid I don't remember, she faltered at last. Try to think, Lady Omoe. I have tried, but I can't. Her voice had fallen almost to a whisper. Need we insist? Put in the president compassionately. There are sufficient witnesses as to what passed on that occasion, without further harassing her ladyship. Quite so, sir, the major agreed in his dry voice. It only remains for the prisoner to question the witness if he so wishes. Tremaine shook his head. It is quite unnecessary, sir, he assured the president, and never saw the swift, grim smile that flashed across Sir Terence's stern face. Of the court, Sir Terence was the only member who could desire to prolong the painful examination of her ladyship. But he perceived from the president's attitude that he could not do so without betraying the vindictiveness actuating him. And so he remained silent for the present. He would have gone so far as to suggest that her ladyship should be invited to remain in court against the possibility of further evidence being presently required from her, but that he perceived there was no necessity to do so. Her deadly anxiety concerning the prisoner must in itself be sufficient to determine her to remain, as indeed it proved, accompanied and half supported by Miss Armitage, who was almost as pale as herself, but otherwise very steady in her bearing. Lady Omoe made her way, with faltering steps to the benches ranged against the side wall, and sat there to hear the remainder of the proceedings. After the uninteresting and perfunctory evidence of the sergeant of the guard, who had been present when the prisoner was ordered under arrest, the next witness called was Colonel Grant. His testimony was strictly in accordance with the facts which we know him to have witnessed, but when he was in the middle of his statement, an interruption occurred. At the extreme right of the dais on which the table stood, there was a small oaken door set in the wall, and giving access to a small anteroom that was known, rightly or wrongly, as the abbot's chamber. That anteroom communicated directly with what was now the guardroom, which accounts for the newcomer being ushered in that way by the corporal at the time. At the opening of that door, the members of the court looked round in sharp annoyance, suspecting here some impertinent intrusion. The next moment, however, this was changed to respectful surprise. There was a scraping of chairs, and they were all on their feet in token of respect for the slight man in the gray undressed frock who entered. It was Lord Wellington. Saluting the members of the court with 2 fingers to his cocked hat, he immediately desired them to sit, peremptorily waving his hand, and requesting the president not to allow his entrance to interrupt or interfere with the course of the inquiry. "A chair here for me, if you please, Sergeant," he called, and, when it was fetched, took his seat at the end of the table, with his back to the door through which he had come and immediately facing the prosecutor. He retained his hat, but placed his riding crop on the table before him. and the only thing he would accept was an officer's notes of proceedings as far as they had gone, which that officer himself was prompt to offer, with a repeated injunction to the court to proceed. Lord Wellington became instantly absorbed in the study of these notes. Colonel Grant, standing very straight and stiff in the originally red coat, which exposure to many weathers had faded to an autumnal brown, continued and concluded his statement of what he had seen and heard on the night of the 28th of May in the garden at Monsanto. The judge advocate now invited him to turn his memory back to the luncheon party at Sir Terence's on the 27th, and to tell the court of the altercation that had passed on that occasion between Captain Tremaine and Count Samoval. The conversation at table, he replied, turned, as was perhaps quite natural, upon the recently published general order prohibiting dueling and making it a capital offense for officers in His Majesty's service in the peninsula. Count Samoval stigmatized the order as a degrading and arbitrary one, and spoke in defense of single combat as the only honorable method of settling differences between gentlemen. Captain Tremaine dissented rather sharply, and appeared to resent the term degrading applied by the Count to the enactment. Words followed, and then someone, Lady Omoe, I think, and as I imagine with intent to soothe the feelings of Count Samoval, which appeared to be ruffled, appealed his vanity by mentioning the fact that he was himself a famous swordsman. To this Captain Tremaine's observation was a rather unfortunate one, although I must confess that I was fully in sympathy with it at the time. He said, as nearly as I remember, that at the moment Portugal was in urgent need of famous swords to defend her from invasion and not to increase the disorders at home. Lord Wellington looked up from the notes and thoughtfully stroked his high-bridged nose. His stern, handsome face was coldly impassive, his fine eyes resting upon the prisoner, but his attention all to what Colonel Grant was saying. It was a remark of which Samoval betrayed the bitterest resentment. He demanded of Captain Tremaine that he should be more precise, and Tremaine replied that, whilst he had spoken generally, Samoval was welcome to the cap if he found it fitted him. To that he added a suggestion that, as the conversation appeared to be tiresome to the ladies, it would be better to change its topic. Count Samoval consented, but with the promise, rather threateningly delivered, that it should be continued at another time. That, sir, is all, I think. Have you any questions to the witness, Captain Tremaine? Inquired the judge advocate. As before, Captain Tremaine's answer was in the negative, coupled with the now usual admission that Colonel Grant's statement accorded perfectly with his own recollection of facts. The court, however, desired enlightenment on several subjects. Came first of all Carruthers's inquiries as to the bearing of the prisoner when ordered under arrest, eliciting from Colonel Grant a variant of a usual reply. It was not inconsistent with innocence, he said. It was an answer which appeared to startle the court, and perhaps Carruthers would have acted best in Tremaine's interest had he left the question there. But having obtained so much, he eagerly sought for more. Would you say that it was inconsistent with guilt? He cried. Colonel Grant smiled slowly, and slowly shook his head. I fear I cannot go so far as that, he answered, thereby plunging poor Carruthers into despair. And now Colonel Fletcher voiced a question agitating the minds of several members of the Count. Colonel Grant, he said, you have told us that on the night in question you had Count Samoval under observation, and that upon word being brought to you of his movements by one of your agents, you yourself followed him to Monsanto. Would you be good enough to tell the court why you were watching the deceased's movements at the time? Colonel Grant glanced at Lord Wellington. He smiled a little reflectively and shook his head. I am afraid that the public interest will not allow me to answer your question. Since, however, Lord Wellington himself is present, I would suggest that you ask his lordship whether I am to give you the information you require. Certainly not, said his lordship crisply, without awaiting further question. Indeed, one of my reasons for being present is to ensure that nothing on that score shall transpire. There followed a moment's silence. Then the president ventured a question. May we ask, sir, at least whether Colonel Grant's observation of Count Samoval resulted from any knowledge of, or expectation of, this duel that was impending? Certainly you may ask that. Lord Wellington consented. It did not, sir, said Colonel Grant in answer to the question. What grounds had you, Colonel Grant, for assuming that Count Samoval was going to Monsanto? The president asked. Chiefly the direction taken. And nothing else? I think we are upon forbidden ground again, said Colonel Grant, and again he looked at Lord Wellington for direction. I do not see the point of the question, said Lord Wellington, replying to that glance. Colonel Grant has quite plainly informed the court that his observation of Count Samoval had no slightest connection with this duel, nor was inspired by any knowledge or suspicion on his part that any such duel was to be fought. With that, I think the court should be content. It has been necessary for Colonel Grant to explain to the court his own presence at Monsanto at midnight on the 28th. It would have been better, perhaps, had he simply stated that it was fortuitous, although I can understand that the court might have hesitated to accept such a statement. That, however, is really all that concerns the matter. Colonel Grant happened to be there. That is all that the court need remember. Let me add the assurance that it would not in the least assist the court to know more, so far as the case under consideration is concerned. In view of that, the president notified that he had nothing further to ask a witness, and Colonel Grant saluted and withdrew to a seat near Lady Omoe. There followed the evidence of Major Carruthers with regard to the dispute between Count Samoval and Captain Tremaine, which substantially bore out what Sir Terence and Colonel Grant had already said, notwithstanding that it manifested a strong bias in favor of the prisoner. The conversation which Samoval threatened to resume does not appear to have been resumed, he added in conclusion. How can you say that? Major Swan asked him. I may state my opinion, sir, flashed Carruthers, his chubby face reddening. Indeed, sir, you may not, the president assured him. You are upon oath to give evidence of facts directly within your own personal knowledge. It is directly within my own personal knowledge that Captain Tremaine was called away from the table by Lady Omoe, and that he did not have another opportunity of speaking with Count Samoval that day. I saw the Count leave shortly after, and at the time Captain Tremaine was still with her ladyship, as her ladyship can testify if necessary. He spent the remainder of the afternoon with me at work, and we went home together in the evening. We shared the same lodging in Alcantara. There was still all of the next day, said Sir Harry. Do you say that the prisoner was never out of your sight on that day, too? I do not, but I can't believe. I am afraid you are going to state opinions again, Major Swan interposed. Yet it is evidence of a kind, insisted Carruthers, with the tenacity of a bulldog. He looked as if he would make it a personal matter between himself and Major Swan if he were not allowed to proceed. I can't believe that Captain Tremaine would have embroiled himself further with Count Samoval. Captain Tremaine has too high a regard for discipline and for orders, and he is the least excitable man I have ever known. Nor do I believe that he would have consented to meet Samoval without my knowledge. Not perhaps unless Captain Tremaine desired to keep the matter secret, in view of the general order, which is precisely what it is contended that he did. Falsely contended, then, snapped Major Carruthers, to be instantly rebuked by the president. He sat down in a huff, and the judge advocate called Private Bates, who had been on sentry duty on the night of the 28th, to corroborate the evidence of the sergeant of the guard as to the hour at which the prisoner had driven up to Monsanto in his cockle. Private Bates having been heard, Major Swan announced that he did not propose to call any further witnesses, and resumed his seat. Thereupon, to the president's invitation, Captain Tremaine replied that he had no witnesses to call at all. In that case, Major Swan, said Sir Harry, the court will be glad to hear you further. And Major Swan came to his feet again to address the court for the prosecution.